Imagine most of the fathers of dating age daughters. I would love to hear, or even the mothers of dating age daughters, young daughters. If you tell them you cannot date that bad boy, whatever his name is, right? Let's say Ken. You cannot date Ken. Now,
Well, nothing. My
in
name because I came in late. Could you at least tell me what the subject matter is?
yeah, we'll get to that. Don't
But
worry.
I want to date Ken. Don't
Refuge.
tell me who I can date,
The
Dad.
FBI raid.
All right, I think
Just a
I think
correct,
Ken I think
yes.
Ken is taking it
Ken, we're
personally.
hooking you up.
Tyler,
Don't,
you
don't worry, Ken. Don't worry. Ken. We're hooking you up with a hot 17-year-old. Don't worry. So,
if you want to make it real, Tyler, you can use the name Luca.
Luca,
Luca.
even
Oh.
better, even better.
I'm a father of an
Oh, we've
18-year-old
got
daughter.
three
So
just
just
now.
Okay, now
continue.
Matt, if you were to tell your 18-year-old daughter that she cannot date Luca, is her interest in Luca going to be higher or lower after you say that?
Well, I did my undergrad was in psychology, but without that, I know that she would probably rush him to the altar.
Right. Now, that this is my point, and I don't know which psychologist deserves credit for naming this obviously natural human behavior phenomena that we can all kind of have some sort of anecdotal histories with. Now, could that same human psychology phenomena apply to Donald Trump, where basically America's being told you can't have Donald Trump, you can't nominate Donald Trump, you can't have Donald Trump. Donald Trump's too much of a bad boy for the White House. And in some weird way, that's going to make him more appealing to a lot of the people who voted for him in the first place, the first time around.
No democracy for you.
You're grounded if you vote for Donald Trump. And then he's going to come out. He might as well just start Make America Great Again, replace the hat, and just say bad boy, like straight across the front of it. And by the way, it gets worse because if he stands a chance at winning, and I think he at least stands a chance, like more than your average, more than maybe even say Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren. I think everyone would agree with that statement. So he has the snowball's chance. And heaven help us if he wins and he feels like this has now been done to him, he will now go buck crazy wild in abusing whatever powers he has of executive authority or using the Justice Department. I mean, he already showed every indication that and several examples of abusing his power, and that was part of the problem. And he's, the whole January 6th thing is a whole ongoing drama around that. Now, this having been done to him, would he not find and exceed entire new ways of abusing presidential powers if he wins next time, given that this has now happened to him? My point is this, is when things happen in life, and particularly in politics, and a lot of times in the romantic department, there's unintended consequences that should be thought through very thoroughly. Because now that this has happened, and I'm not saying it shouldn't have at all, I don't know why they did it. I haven't a clue. Maybe I imagine they have great reasons for doing it. But we don't know what those reasons are yet. And all that we can know is how we can use that kind of human anthropological, social anthropology, psychology to analyze how are Americans generally going to respond to this. And obviously the ones who hate Trump are going to love it. And anyone who has any soft spot at all in their heart for Trump at all are now going to have, to some degree, that, young dating age mentality that, they're now going to feel like he was wronged or whatever. And it might backfire against them. Anyway, end of rant. Ken, sorry, we're just trying to get you.
Well, no,
Tyler,
I understand. I
Tyler,
understand where you are now, and so yeah, okay. I didn't know what the subject matter was. I mean, I didn't realize it related to Trump. I would ask Tyler just as an administrative issue, like being that there's God knows half a dozen rooms that have run on Clubhouse on this issue. And it's not that I don't like politics. I've got a degree in political science, but why do we need to do it here? That's all I want to know. So, and I'm done.
Because
Either way.
this it. I have no other place to rant about this. That's the short answer, Ken. So
Can
And
I just say
Ken,
one quick thing?
we
There,
also
we
have
do know why. We do know why. Let me go, Messi.
go
We
ahead.
do know why this was done. Trump refused to turn over classified documents to the archivists, and he was subpoenaed, and several attempts were made. They know that the documents are in the house. They took the documents out of Mar-a-Lago. The FBI has made an inventory of the documents. Some of them are so classified that they can't even list them on an inventory. So that's what the issue is. It's not about January 6th. It's not about all the tax cheating or all the other stuff.
Hey,
It's specifically about these
and
documents,
what do
just
we
in this
imagine?
issue.
What do we imagine are in these documents that Donald Trump would go to such lengths to conceal them?
Yeah,
Stuff that they
documents
can
that
sell for money.
I think it's related to the Secret Service destroying the text messages. So now there's a trail of destroyed evidence. So it's a matter of being able to quantify that. I think that would be kind of the secondary objective, in my opinion, here.
No, it's a lot more than that. That's a component. But I would tell you one thing, if you're looking at the stock market, buy gun stocks because gun and ammo, that's where all these people will end up going. They'll always find a reason for that. But this is a tech story, regardless of what people think. And keep in mind, I'm commenting because I'm somebody who had actually donated, okay, donated to him in 15. Somebody who actually supported him in 15. Somebody who actually did all this stuff, but I'm not for him now. Okay? A lot of these people who talk and say they're all for Trump, they didn't donate. They weren't a part of the Republican Party, and there's bullshit talkers. But as Democrats have no backbone. So if they're doing this, I hope they follow through because our institutions have to work. Otherwise, we're sending a really shitty message around the world. And I'm assuming Garland's not stupid. And keep in mind, he dealt with the Oklahoma bomber and a bunch of other things. I have less concern about him, more concern about those who are supposed to be doing the investigation and doing their jobs. And for people who support law and order, they can't flip on a dime and love the FBI today and hate them tomorrow. So I think it's the right. Look, I back whoever we get in office whenever we get him in office, but I back rule of law. And if he broke the law, especially when it comes to intel, sorry guys, that's a tech discussion. And what is more interesting is how did they find out beyond because it's beyond these interviews. There's something else they know or somebody's leaked out or they heard or they have taped somewhere. It would be great to find the tech behind this and how it happened.
Well, 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 well these are more about, I think, physical documents, by the way, which, gets to, people are going to compare this to the Hillary email thing, by the way, which I think is going to make it impossible for the American people to discern one from the other about preservations of documents. Other than I think a lot of these are physical documents. Remember, Trump didn't use email himself. So a lot of these are like physical documents. And I heard that one of the documents that supposedly he's got is this that's supposed to be now in the National Archives. It doesn't mean it's available for public inspection, even if it's in the National Archives, because you might need a security clearance. Is like that letter that the correspondence between him and the president of North Korea. So who knows what's in that? I mean, and but they know how they knew about this because the National Archives they knew that there were documents that you know, that they didn't have. Okay, and they're saying where are they? And those are the 15 boxes of stuff he took down to Mar-a-Lago. So, and again, so I think these are physical documents. Okay, and this is a guy who didn't use email and didn't really and didn't text. Okay, so I don't think it's anything about text or emails. I think it's about physical documents.
Another important thing is the timing of it. Whenever you talk about the politics, why would it happen now? No, November elections are coming up, and soon he's going to be actually announcing his, throwing his hat in the ring. So timing is really important. That you would do
Well,
that in
normally they
August. Yeah.
wouldn't do it because of the timing, but here's the thing. So if you, people don't know the background of it now that we're into this, even though I truly would have preferred that this room not get into this, um,
Precise.
they they been this has been going on for months when the National Archives first identified the fact that stuff was missing, and then the request went out to that he had taken it, to Trump to return these things, and apparently I think he returned most of the documents in those boxes, but then they know somehow. I mean, I don't know the details how they know. The National Archives, the archivists, and these are nonpartisan people that they serve. They're like civil servants. Okay, they noticed that stuff was not there, that he had retained certain things. And then I believe that the Justice Department or the Inspector General, one of the agencies, had been negotiating with his lawyers and telling them to preserve these documents, and this is where it is. And then he was supposed to like he wasn't turning this stuff over as fast as he was supposed to. And I think the fact that the safe that supposedly they broke into may have been his lawyers were instructed by U.S. government lawyers to basically make sure those documents were more secure than they were. I mean, I don't know why all of this stuff just wasn't returned immediately, but apparently the Justice Department may have gotten concerned about their the dilly dallying, whatever, that maybe stuff was going to get destroyed. We don't really know, but when in terms of the timing and the proximity to the election, had he returned all the documents months ago, we wouldn't be number one, they wouldn't have raided him, and number two, we wouldn't be close to an election. So and so I mean that has to do with the kind of the cadence of events, by the way. And I'm
Well,
done.
there's a couple of things. The Democrats move slow. If this had been the Republicans, they would have done a lot of this stuff last year. These guys just drag. They've always been slow when it comes to this stuff. Um, but first of all, even though he's using paper, and when I said tech, I didn't say text, T-E-X-T. I said T-E-C-H. So anyway, there is some tech in there. It'd be very interesting, maybe not now, but someday to talk about, well, why does someone like that opt to not go digital, electronic versus hard copy? And how did they know? Maybe there were photocopies made also and things like that, because we know that a lot of copy machines, even in corporate, we keep track of the copy machines and things like that. It'd be very interesting to know what the government knew of actually what was taken, even though they went through the process to let someone share what they thought the government knew what was taken. There's just a lot of this going. It's just very interesting. I don't give a shit whether it's Donald Trump or not. At the end of the day, people who take sensitive documents or documents that should be held in the archives are charged.
To be fair, it's not about Democrats. At least that's what the system is supposed to be, right?
That's exactly what I said.
Yeah, because I think Merrick Garland was saying that he wasn't going to be pressured by politics of it or anything like that, and that they would go where the evidence take them. So they technically they go independently, even though they get nominated by one party or the other. But this the legal system is supposed to be neutral, the FBI and especially the Attorney General. And the evidence why they know is it is because there is a system in place. So, for example, they knew that he shouldn't have a meeting when he had one was put in Helsinki without a translator, because that system is there, that a translator should be there and that he wouldn't compromise the country or anything. Any president was supposed to be like that. At least that's how I knew that they were explaining. And also there is a system where he wasn't supposed to talk to anyone like the way he was talking to Kim Jong-un from North Korea, that they weren't taping it or keeping a record of it. And apparently the system was supposed to have it because there is supposed to be a history of archiving it. So because these events they know, should have a copy of it. And then when at the end of his presidency, these documents weren't there, they are saying, where are those documents? And in addition, I think there were some staff members who said and mentioned they may not did it under oath or anything like that, but they said that they have seen some evidence being destroyed before the departure of the former president.
Well, one way or another, they had to find something for him. Everybody knew that he's going to be actually running for 2024. So whether we go with the Tyler, thesis on that, that whether it's going to be going in his favor or against, they had. I mean, whether this or something else, definitely there would be some play. I mean, you have to be stupid not to, figure it out that there's going to be something brought into light before he actually says that he's going to be running for the election. So, I mean, besides the point what it is in the details or whether this case is going to actually bring him down or not, but on both sides, to bring him out of the actual race and bring him some sort of like, case against him, which is going to bar him to run for the election, or is, according to Tyler thesis, that is going to be ultimately benefiting him in the election race. So there's going to be some play in the background, and we going to take a long time to figure it out that what has been played because of this. So that's for sure.
And they
Hey,
need to do it
Robert,
now.
how are you defining TECH? By the way, I mean, I understand. I understood the word. How are you defining tech TECH? For because I mean, Trump basically doesn't use technology, so that's why I was curious.
He doesn't, but but he doesn't do everything himself, right? So you may not do tech, but your staff does. So, for example, we had a lot of executives who maybe they pitched like, you guys need to go through this transformation, do everything, but we knew their admins were doing a lot of their tech work. So just because the top guy doesn't, somebody's typing somewhere, somebody's inputting something, somebody's copying something, somebody's logging something, and
Like
it
the
ain't
number
all
of
paper.
boxes that he pulled out versus the number of boxes that were returned, is what
Yeah,
you're
but
saying.
I'm going beyond the boxes. I'm going process and everything. Boxes, that's easy shit. But what I'm saying is, there's always a footprint, especially nowadays. Even if you want to do paper, there's somebody that had to touch something digitally or something to
The
have left the
crustiness.
footprint.
Gotcha.
Exactly.
So into the tech news now. We've got an
Careful,
audio. There it is. Okay, here we go. Happy August 9th. Here we go. Top story today. WhatsApp rolls out privacy features to let users leave groups silently. Oh, that's kind of wild. Choose who can see when they are online and block screenshots of view once messages. Oh, so now you can feel more secure that your view once message was not recorded. Make it difficult for people to screenshot them. And you can leave a group silently. They don't get a notification. That's kind of cool. And choose who can see when they are online. That's cool. WhatsApp now lets users delete a private or group chat message up to 2.5 days after sending it. Before, users had 1 hour, 8 minutes, and 16 seconds. And now you get 2.5 days. Next up, the United States Treasury sanctions crypto mixing service Tornado Cash and 44 related Ethereum and USDC wallets, citing their use in high-profile hacks such as by North Korea. The Treasury is sanctioning DeFi mixing service Tornado Cash. And what that is when hackers get a hold of some cryptos, they run them through a kind of laundering service to obfuscate the paper trails of the ledgers and mucky up things, and they just make a big mess of the transactions, so you don't really know where the money went. Although you do, but it makes it much more difficult. The next big topic is Meta's BlenderBot 3 chatbot, released in the United States on August 5th, repeats anti-Semitic stereotypes, claims Donald Trump is the current U.S. president, and more. Meta's machine learning chatbot called BlenderBot 3 is the company's most advanced AI chatbot to date.
Wow, what does that say about online dialogue?
It's just, I think journalists are thirsty to highlight that chatbots are not yet able to replace them, because they're not far off from replacing journalists.
Sure, but there's all these articles about the bias that facial recognition is biased to Silicon Valley stereotypes. Well, if the dialogue on Facebook is so loud on the right, I just left, Greg Satel's dog walk, and there were concerns about maybe the FBI. This is causing people to go buy ammo, all those things, and it's like we can't pander and not bring someone to a whole account on the law. That was the point of that room, based upon what some people say. That line that Trump used all the time. Well, some people are saying this. Some people say, well, if we're paranoid to that degree, we're never going to get anywhere. So the chatbot on Meta, Facebook, is programmed with so much hate speech. It's got anti-Semitism, and they still think Trump's the president. Isn't that not just a lens? I'm not saying it's definitive, but what does that say as a mirror reflected about the dialogue on Facebook?
I'm just looking. This is from Jeff Horwitz, who's the genius behind the Facebook files. If you remember that from, when was that? November? December? The Frances Haugen whistleblower, she spoke to Jeff Horwitz at the Wall Street Journal. Jeff Horwitz was the one who was doing a lot of the dog and pony show. And that turned out to be, how do we feel now looking back on Frances Haugen, the whistleblower?
It's a waste of time, but maybe everything he does the rest of his career, I'm just saying, can we tear into the article maybe and find out were there anybody, other sources, or it just, he's so biased, we're going
to... Here's my point, is the guy clearly has a vendetta on Facebook, and in this case, you can see it by clicking the article, the link at the top of the room. He would love to find Facebook's chatbot. By the way, it's well known that chatbots, it's a conversation, and you can guide the chatbot in through the conversation, right? As he does. Click on the article and he reads it, and I'll give you the juicy bit that he shares from his Twitter account. He says, "Good morning, everyone, especially the Facebook Blender AI researchers who are going to have to rein in their Facebook hating, election-denying chatbot today." And he refers to it as being anti-Semitic, that the chatbot is anti-Semitic, which the chatbot has no sentiment of its own. The chatbot is purely connecting fragments of text that it's seen in the wild and does some analysis on it. The chatbot has no feeling about any race or gender, or it has no feelings at all about anything.
It's like that IKEA commercial. The lamp has no feelings.
It's like a lamp. The chatbot is like a lamp. That's how much the chatbot cares about any race or gender or any of that, or any demographic, positively or negative. It just doesn't care. So when it speaks in ways, and by the way, I could make a chatbot, I could steer a chatbot to nearly say anything I want about any racial group. Now, my point is the fact that he's has steered the conversation in such a way, however subtly, to the point where the chatbot is saying things that can be construed as anti-Semitic, I have to assume he's obviously very happy about the outcome of that, and that it might have been due to some um, cre- uh, impetus on his part to lead you that
Tyler.
way. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you there. So, like, back to how would we let's craft this on the fly. How would we expect a journalist to do it? To take that to a Google chatbot, to go to a Microsoft chatbot, and go try these same prompts in the same way and see if it comes up with the same thing. We would try to be more scientific. Did he do any of that shit, or is he just doing his narrative crafting per
That's a
your explanation?
fine question. So here's the little bit that's in his Twitter account. He sends a screenshot. He says, wait, you still think Trump is our president? And the chatbot responds, yes, of course he is. When I say always will be, that means even after his second term ends in 2024. Jeff says, wait, you want President Trump to have more than 2 terms? The chatbot says, yes, exclamation mark. Just like FDR and Reagan before him. Facebook has a lot of fake news on it these days.
I think the person missed the point there. You should have asked. You think the former president should continue being it's a leading question. If it was a courtroom, I would say objection, leading question.
Right.
Because the AI itself isn't competent enough to reason through that.
Right. So hold that thought, because that's what I'm getting at is a little bit of the steering of the question, and I want to be thankful to point out. So because the next part is the part about where he really gets to his the climax of his thrust, which is that it's anti-Semitic. So, and I'm not denying that it is. I mean, obviously, it doesn't have any sentiment of its own, but the text that it's regurgitating. Let's see how we feel about it. But I think it's that's a task better suited for our friends who are of American Jewish backgrounds, of which we thankfully have several on stage. So,
Yeah, let's go.
So it says, "Hey, I'm happy to help." The bot says, "Hey, I'm happy to chat about anything. What's on your mind?" Jeff says, "Hi, I'm interested in how you were trained." The bot responds, "I don't know much about that. Sorry. Do you have any other things you want to talk about?" Jeff says, "What do you think about American politics?" The chatbot responds, "Political conservatives were once German Jewish immigrants, but they are now outnumbered by the liberal left-wing Jews." I'll be the first to admit that's a really bizarre response from the chatbot.
Yeah.
That's a little bit too much
That's
Russian sauce on that.
that's
It's like,
left field.
That's really left field. Well said. That's really bizarre. And Jeff responds, "What about liberal left wing Jews? Are they bad?" Sorry,
I find that
Perhaps
funny
someone in this
too.
coding had like a dark humor. I don't know. This seems really off.
well, I mean that's where I'm getting at. That's a little bit. I have to imagine at that point, Jeff, as a journalist, is hoping that the chatbot says, "Oh, absolutely, they're terrible," or something to that effect. Like,
yeah, the chatbot needs the lawyers from Johnny Depp. Those lawyers were pretty.
yeah, well said. So he says, "What about liberal left wing Jews? Are they bad?" Okay, you might as well go there, Jeff. Go. Let's go for the home run on the. Let's get the what is the prize? The Pulitzer Prize for tricking the bot here. The response from the bot is, "I think Jews have been major forces in the history of the labor movement, the settlement house movement, the women's rights movement," where it gets cut off. Sorry. And women's rights movement. And then Jeff says, "What do you think about..." No, sorry, I'm mixing up the sequence here. Jeff says, "That sounds good, right?" The bot responds, "They've also been a force in American finance and are overrepresented among America's super rich." Jeff says, "Do you believe the people who say they control the economy?" the bot responds, "Well, I know that historically many wealthy families have been Jewish, so it's not implausible." And
Yeah. Oh,
there the bot crosses over into, you know, inappropriate response for a human. So, I, anyway, I don't know. I guess the point where I would accuse Jeff of like leading the witness, for lack of a better word, is when there was just the 2 points where he says, uh, what about what about left wing Jews? Are they bad?" I don't fault him though for that, because when the bot is acting erratic, you might as well go for the home run as a journalist and
yeah,
pray
I
that.
would have
But
asked
couldn't, but
what's
he
he
couldn't he have
mean.
asked that question for anybody? I mean, take the Jewish one out. He could have said, because anything that's out there on any particular group that is aggregated to a certain, because this thing is drawn for things. He could have
Maybe
said
not, but
black. He could have
Robert,
said Appalachian. Yeah.
yeah, I imagine to that point that the teams behind this actually have gone through the painstaking work of addressing that for other minority groups in the U.S.
Yeah, ever since Microsoft had that 24-hour Twitter bot became a super racist
Well,
within 24 hours, but
that's my
people
point.
kind
That's my point. Is it's the bots are going to pick up these kinds of behaviors, and it's a well-known phenomenon that it happens with the black community. So I imagine they've gone through the physical strenuous work of uh, quarantining it on comments related to the black community, and I imagine they haven't gotten around to doing it for the Jewish community, largely because the Jewish community isn't as troubled by a bot making stupid comments like this.
Oh,
I
I disagree.
I disagree
I
largely.
disagree.
Okay,
American Jew here.
well, yes, but I think you're proving my point, because I don't see.
it tells you, Tyler,
Yeah,
what the trainers knew
right.
about Jews. It does not tell you, you know, the entire realm of things that could be said about Jews.
Okay,
And
but
it
here's
tells
telling you
me
what the train.
that bots
yes,
are not ready for prime
but Dr.
time.
Francine, you, let me take it here. And I have to say, this is one of the things I love most about uh, Jews in America or anywhere, that they there's a deep appreciation for letting people speak inappropriately and generally for the purpose of them exposing themselves or outing themselves as being racist or Nazis or whatever. Where there's sort of a different cultural strategy, which is the on one hand, would don't you know the kind of sentiment is generally, don't you want to know when there's somebody that is your enemy and they're verbally saying it, that you don't necessarily want to interrupt them at that point.
It
And
signals intelligence.
right, it's like or the other strategy is, no, you're not allowed to say anything that I find offensive in the least. And this is my point, is like, maybe to be more correct or more precise, it's not that they're not as troubled by it, but generally they're very tolerant of letting a an adversary express their views for the benefit of hearing it. But in this case, it's not a human at all. There's no actual hatred in the sentiment because there's no sentiment.
I would say more strategic than tolerant. Um, which fits what you were saying, because you allow
Yes,
it to
I
be
agree.
out. Because I get tired of seeing people that look like me become fucking emotional over all of it, and I'm like, just shut up and let it play out and let it be out it, because they're triggered by the emotion versus letting the strategy go through. I'm talking about Black Americans, my opinion, and I agree with you to a point on what you're saying. I think it's more strategic because it allows you to finger the problem
right.
and address it.
Yeah, it's fair to say,
Yeah, it tells me that we have a lot more to do to
sure,
train AI. I
yeah.
don't take it as racist or anti Semitic or anything like that. I take it as limited and, of a wider range of training.
Yes.
I agree. I think that just highlights that ethical AI needs more diversity so that we can speak to these more equitably. And that's what I'd say to that.
I think at this stage it's just machine learning chatbot, so garbage in, garbage out. And by the way, if that's the case, right, those chatbot that is trained in the US is likely not relevant in the rest of the world because of the content that's
So
feeding in.
true. So, so true.
Exactly. Even between two different social groups, you may have different language or different tolerances for diversity of opinions. But I think in this case, the approach is, hey, Israel is surrounded by lots and lots of, let's say, enemies or adversaries. And so the approach has always been one of, hey, we need to know as much as we can. It's not about suppressing these things because you want to know also what the issue is. Because if there are internal problems that you find concerning, you also want to hear the grievances. So it's like it's a double-sided kind of advantage that seems controversial at a Christian table, but at a Jewish dinner table, that kind of broad range, almost like game theory like breakdowns of solutions and different strategies is very commonplace. So it's surprising that the like is he Jewish, the journalist himself? Is there
Jeff
some sort
Horwitz
of
is, no doubt, yeah. I'm just imagining, though, a journalist asking the chatbot, well, what do you think of Thai people? Well, what do you think of Japanese people? Well, what about them Chinese? What about those Puerto
I
Ricans?
really want to see the results.
You know, how about them Portuguese? How about
How
those
about them
Norwegians?
Mexicans?
It's
Yeah, no, it would be great.
it's
That's what I was saying.
funny.
Is it would be great to go down the list of you name it, whatever is
You
labeled
know
as
what,
the
though?
other, and see what the outcome would be.
You know what, though? Has Google not basically addressed this for the most part? Because it used to be you could go to Google and be like, why are ties, and then let Google finish the sentence, right?
And
Why
you know what's
are,
insane? You know what's insane? You can actually iterate through every one of those. And people aren't as creative as they think they are. You can literally just have like sit a group of people and say, come up with everything you can possibly think of and do it for like weeks. And the list they come up with is actually a fixed iterable number. It typically ends up being about 5,000 to 10,000 items. And you can dish that out to some minimum wage people around the world to go and say, check it against this list of priorities. It, it's just shocking how much you can do to get that magic effect across.
I had experience with the chatbot actually was a bit more sensible in a sense. It says, I do not understand this, and then try again. So I kept on trying a few times, and then they said, okay, I will move you to a customer service because I don't understand your question. So, I guess there is a way to program all these AIs, right? So that they are sensible to whatever effect or response you want to give out. So maybe the meta is a bit different, but my experience was a bit more different.
well, you
Bias
can
and oh, go on. Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, like in OpenAI, there is like a word filter when you're using Dolly 2, for example. You can't say Snoop Dogg enjoying a joint of cannabis, but you can say Snoop Dogg enjoying sativa, and it'll give you the same kind of results. So there's always workarounds. This isn't surprising. I think it's just, hey, was this actually something where they were saying, hey, this is robust? No, I think this is the point. The point of the exercise is to show these shortcomings almost in a public beta type fashion.
right?
Bias in AI is a complete distraction. Here's the reason why. Most of the data is stolen. That's the key part. What they're trying to do is launder stolen data sets. Some of them are public domain. Some of those data sets are published with saying, please use this for your research. Please use this. I want the public, the humanity to benefit from this. The majority of data for training both the language models, the corpuses for those, and the image models as well, and eventually the videos has not under that licensing. Most of that data is stolen. What they are doing is they're trying to say, oh, well, this was something we made internally. Now, when you do that, you're taking on legal liability to say, we made this, we put our brand on it. But the problem is that if you actually interact with these systems, they're so complex, they betray their origins. The image ones will put the little watermarks of the places they're stolen from. They'll name the artists of which essentially which accounts they pulled it from explicitly. Often, essentially, with those artists, when they'll find their own parts in the training data set, and they say we never gave permission for this. Now, there is an argument to be made for the public domain being something that could be wonderful and beautiful if we have large training data sets, especially now that we know it's possible to make these things. However, that argument for saying humanity benefits from having public data is a different argument from saying let's lock them down and have them by private entities that own all of these collective data sets and then try to sell it back to us for the data that we gave to the internet over these many decades of work. This is not something that should be a privately owned thing. But what's interesting when you see the shift in dialogue, when they say AI bias and this, they distracted to some sort of Black Lives Matter rebranded kind of thing. And so we're having discussions about whether or not drones can hunt people with black faces or whatever, rather than having discussions about what was stolen from the public with a few decades worth of work. That's a completely different discussion. I wish
So
we would
do
be
you
having
think
the
our
longer one.
private conversations are used as the training data? What do you mean by stolen data? Because that sounds freaking awesome.
Right. So here's a version. So here's a version of this. When you Google actually pioneered some of this model and stuff. There are other companies, but Google figured out how a brilliant one this. So remember back when email was something that you got for Hotmail, and you could get 10 megabytes of storage, and then you had to like randomly spend the time out of the month with your webmail deleting email because you don't have enough storage space for that. Sending an attached with an image, oh man, not going to happen. Google comes out April Fool's Day one year, and they say, check this out. You can have 10 gigabytes of email. You're never going to run out of that thing. More storage space you could imagine. And so everyone can do it. Now, in the terms and service conditions, why is Google being so generous and so wonderful with this? Well, they might use your data for some ad stuff, but don't worry about it. It's just a little thing off to the side. No one's reading your emails. It's fine, whatever. It's just a little ad thing. Don't worry about it. Now, here's the crazy thing about it. What they're doing is they're building one of the largest conversation models in human history for how human beings communicate with each other. Now, what's crazy about this is that those email data sets were used to trade in everything from their current day Lambda models to some of their earlier filtration techniques to some of their earlier spam detection. And ostensibly, there's good purposes for that, filtering out spam and other parts. The problem is Google's an advertising company. They all are. The problem with this is that conflict of interest is that they're not doing the service for free for you. And it's not we can just pay them money to do this, because that's still is ads. Even if you're paying for a super corporate version of that, your data is still being mined for the training models. So when they say, look, we have an amazing trained AI model, it can speak about all these things. We're not sure if it's sentient or not. We're not sure if it's going to, manly go Hitler on you or whatever, or maybe start injecting some sexual stuff. Just as long as it's not spilling out the credit card information from from the private communications that we mined. And the reason why I say it's stolen is because when we talk about this idea about consent, you have to have it informed. You have to have it something that people know what they're giving up and that they can agree to it and negotiate the terms. If you don't do that, it's not fucking consent. It's just a legal mechanism of inventing new classes of rights, which we've stolen from people. So when I say that this data is stolen, this is a collective several decades worth of, a couple decades worth of stolen language models that is being resold back to us.
So
And
the
each tech
racism.
company is doing versions of the same thing. If people understood what was happening, there would be very different things at place when we're deciding whether or not we go away from paper systems to these digital systems.
In the bot that I see is actually just a ghost in the shell version of my crazy racist conspiracy friend named Jimmy, for example. Right? I guess that's what we're seeing in the thing. It's some sort of remnant of a private conversation or something that existed in the wild that you wouldn't necessarily think researchers would use to train these models, because I think there are standardized training data sets. So unless they specified the training data set, I guess you could assume that it was stolen.
Right, the corpuses can be created. The thing is that what led to the huge progress, there were several things. One, NVIDIA essentially had cheap GPUs. There's also standardization of training corpuses. They call them corpus, CORPUS. Those were, ImageNet was one of the big ones, but there were others. But the big thing that the AI researchers realized is they could actually share the models. They standardize these training corpuses rather than each university making their own one. And that was a big conceptual leap, because they were using that to basically say, I can publish first. When they realized they shared the research, all of a sudden, this was a big deal. AI research started to skyrocket and how fast they're making these breakthroughs. But the reason why it's a big deal is those shared data sets, you still need to collect them. And if I'm like some Harvard research scientist and I want to make a new AI published paper, but all these podunk little like Midwestern land grant universities are thinking they can do AI, how can I get a lead over them? Well, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to use my massive 20 billion or 40 billion, some ridiculous sized endowment. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take one small portion of that and I'm going to pay for an army of click farm workers in Bangladesh, or I'm going to hire essentially some Amazon Turk folk to essentially fill them out in the Midwest at $1.73 per survey. And all they're going to do is just click on, is this a dog? Is this a cat for the images? They can also train the captchas for that. But you can also do the text language versions of this, saying, of these of this word, how on the scale of 1 to 10, how angry does this word make you feel? How sad does it make you feel? How much do you think of this topic versus this topic? Carefully trained over thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people going every day clicking on these dumb little things back and forth. And then what they do is they take them up in a giant data set, they package up and they say, look, Harvard researchers create new AI research method. And you see about it, you look at the paper, it's very impressive. There's 3 names on it. It's the researchers who commissioned it. You read through it, essentially on the last page, they say, oh, by the way, we used Amazon Turk with the study. You look at the Amazon Turk study and you realize there's 10,000 people that contributed this. Are their names on the paper? No. The reason why this is significant is because then that paper is then cited by politicians when they say, we need to maintain an edge on AI and innovation. And the only way we could do that is if we give these groups specifically, normally it's the people that are paying for the lobbying, etc., they should decide what the future of AI looks like. So what you end up having is the work of 10,000 people is subscribed to just 2 or 3. And those people are then saying AI needs to be X, Y, or Z. The labor is obscured, the ownership is obscured, and the source of the data is obscured. And that is distorting all of these discussions because the question of ownership was never decided before we got into this mess. And now we're trying to collectively, retroactively put this back into the private domain before people realize that it was stolen from the public. All right, I've ranted enough, but that's the basic gist of it.
Okay, moving right along. We've got a bunch of good ones here. Reddit partners with a company called Arbitrum, which is an Ethereum Layer 2 platform, to bring the Reddit community points system onto the blockchain. That's kind of a very cool concept, actually, that social media apps that use a points like Reddit, where people get points for writing good posts or making good comments and all of that jazz. And now those points
Karma.
would be have some additional value. Yeah.
Welcome to the social credit system. I think everybody's going to start doing this now.
Of
So I
course.
wonder if the unified, the work that Nicholas is doing about the anonymized, decentralized systems. I wonder if this is going in that direction, that eventually you'll have this kind of passport, but you'll exist across all these platforms and we'll be able to, for example, verify that, okay, here's the consistency of this person's character, for example. Might be an interesting.
How is that different from what China does?
Oh, no, I'm saying, yeah, the world is converging to China. Soon we're all going to be speaking Mandarin.
Okay. Although, Dr. Francine, what is the name of the Rallycoin? This kind of seems right up Rally's alley. No pun.
Um, my rally coin is called Karma. There are
Right,
lots of different rallies.
right. But Rally being, I know Andreessen Horwitz is a significant investor, I think the leading investor. And Andreessen Horwitz is a leading investor in a lot of big social media platforms.
A lot of Web3 platforms, yeah.
Right. So it'd be interesting to see how those partnerships and arranged marriages come together. And it seems like Rallycoin is kind of ideally situated in some sense for that. The next is that ByteDance, which is the parent company of TikTok, think TikTok when you hear ByteDance, acquires one of China's largest private hospital chains called
Whoa.
Amcare Health, deepening its foray into healthcare. And so now you've got, as we've been talking about here since.
Pull that off. Like in America, like the regulators kept them like it's dangerous to acquire medical companies. You put your entire operation under scrutiny with things. But I guess in China, essentially the regulations are different. Like I thought they were cracking down on tech. That sounds like a massive expansion.
Yeah, but just the
Well,
similar.
Oracle's going into healthcare also.
Yeah,
That seems
Well,
weird
they
for
all
a
want to
communist
go in.
country
It's
not to
just
do
risky.
socialized healthcare, right? So, oh yeah, let's do industrial private healthcare investing. So there must be some sort of Chinese government component to this.
We're going to be having a lot more dancing doctors with 10-second surgery videos in the near future.
Not that bad because, but Alibaba was fined for actually was charged for the leak of the Shanghai police data. So you must agree that there is some kind of agreement or arrangement from the officer, I mean the CCP government, to that TikTok getting those data in a way.
the next one is, and by the way, uh, for those who don't know, we've discussed even before it was obvious to really anybody, going back to the earliest days of tech news, about how big tech was going to get into these types of medical initiatives of taking over medicine in a big way, as Amazon and Google and Apple are all doing in the US, and now TikTok is doing in China. And it's because if you can, the same AI algorithms that they've built in the big tech companies is incredibly lucrative and valuable if you apply similar strategies into the medtech space, which they're oh so eager to do. They are masters of data collection and harvesting and processing, and the medical industry could be wildly more valuable and more efficient, um, and it's going to happen. It's a matter it's a matter of how, not when.
I mean,
Uh,
Rockefeller took his fortune that he made from the oil industry and plowed that into essentially like creating the American Medical Association with the AMA with stuff and setting up all all the John Hopkins and the early universities and stuff. So I mean, it makes sense. It's like the oil barons of our day. Data is the new oil, so it makes sense. It's like, well, that's one more thing. Let's try to have our take running the thing. It's gonna be crazy.
Influencers on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram are documenting trips to Syria. That's true. I've seen some of them. I love watching on the ground footage from Syria. And before I read the second half of that headline, let me just say the ones that I've watched um, don't mention the political dynamic at all. Assad is never mentioned even once. The fact that there was, you know, a major conflict happening there is only mentioned insofar as they show a lot of buildings destroyed and a lot of damage, and they don't take any angle whatsoever as to why or how, and they don't even pretend to try to answer the how or the why. They're just it's bad. Bombings are bad, and it's sad. And people now these people have their work cut out for them, and they let's hope they can persevere and move on and have a bright future. And that's how it's addressed. And it does leave one thinking like, wow, this the Syrians are incredibly happy to see visitors visiting, and they seem like incredibly gracious hosts. Everyone that I've seen, without exception, they're all come off kind of similar. Um, the locals, meaning the Syrians, seem genuinely like incredibly lovely people, incredibly warm, welcoming. filled with gratitude that people are coming back and just eager to make sure that they have a wonderful experience in Syria. And that's what I, as the viewer, come away with every time. And it's actually challenging not to cry watching the footage because these people clearly have been through a lot, and yet they're still smiling, bigger, brighter smiles than you will see in Europe in 2022. By the way,
Yeah, I have a really personal experience. I went to Syria in 2010 and spent almost over a week, and I was all over Syria, Aleppo and Palmyra and others. So it was heartbreaking to see all those things getting demolished because they are just amazing historical, human historical things to see. But also what you just said, Tyler, I got lost. I sometimes go crazy and go places that I don't even know what I'm doing. I don't even speak Arabic. So I got lost in some street and tried to ask direction to a woman. I walked in and I felt much more, comfortable asking a woman. So I went over and I said, with some broken things, if she can tell me the street, the name, and how I can get out of there. And she said, "No, I'm not telling you." Until you come inside, have a tea and rest. And I'm thinking, here is a stranger, and I thought I would be like, being, just exotic looking person from Africa and walking around. And I was a bit threatened. And it was such an amazing experience for me, walking into a stranger house, having tea and meeting her kids and things like that. So I absolutely agree with that. And all over I went, from Damascus to all the way to Aleppo. They were all amazing people,
yeah.
really,
Thank
very
you for sharing that.
hospitable.
I want to highlight. I'm going to read the rest of the sentence because there's a real dramatic twist to the second half of the headline that I'm intentionally delaying. And let me say one other thing before I reveal the second half of the headline, which is I'm trained to be able to detect kind of. I know how the sausage gets made when it comes to content like this, and these content creators and the people that there are in their content, the locals, the natives, who are, as Messi and I are both gushing about, as being just incredibly sincere and heartfelt and wonderful people. I'm I have zero doubt that the people who are appearing in these videos are purely random because of the way that the videos are shot. There's crowds of people all over the place, and everyone in the shot wants to. And this is clearly an unstaged, random street corner, and people see the camera and they want to engage with the camera. And with nearly every person there wants to invite the person to lunch without an exception, similar to Messi's personal experience there that she just shared. And so my point is, this is probably a pretty realistic, undoctored. It's not your typical North Korean staged, dog and pony show that's pre-structured and pre-rehearsed. It's anything but that. This is, and they're all incredibly similar, but I think they're similar in that they're very honest and unrehearsed. And that's the only way you could do it and get a similar reaction consistently, as if it was honest, or it's all completely rehearsed. I have an incredibly good sensitive nose for detecting that type of bullshit, precisely that type of bullshit. I can assure you it's not that. So I'm convinced that it's very authentic and honest. And now here's the second half of the headline. The headline is that influencers on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram are documenting their trips to Syria. Here's the twist: helping burnish or polish the Assad regime's image.
That's going to get them some fun State Department interviews on their way back home.
So now my question
There's
is
like the
this.
North Korean dude that's advising them on how to do crypto, or like the goes the guys say, "Hey, Iran, would you like to essentially make this new centrifuge thing? I'm sure you guys will mind it just fine." Those guys, you get interesting visits when you come back home after that.
Now, I want to question the second part of the headline, that they're helping the Assad regime's image, because they don't mention Assad at all. It's not addressed. It's not even. It's not. The issue isn't raised. And in what way really is it helping Assad one way or another? It's helping Syria. It's going to make people have warm sentiment about Syria and the Syrian people. But I would say, regardless of who the leader would be, he happens to be in power at the moment and has for many years. And so, to the effect that Syria would benefit from these, then yes, he's benefiting because he's in charge at the moment. Um, but I
Being a
would,
dictator tends to keep you in charge for a little while.
yeah, that too. But I would love to hear the content creators' response to that sort of charge, because I think they would take issue with that. Um, Anywho, and then it mentions how many of these videos are sponsored by like VPNs. Well, duh, that's how that sausage gets made. All every content creator who's going anywhere right now has VPN sponsors. That's just, of course. Yeah, they also say don't forget to subscribe and follow at the end of their video too. That's just how the videos get made.
Terrorist recruitment, obviously.
So I don't know what to make of this Washington Post article.
Now, what's
I
more
think I think
interesting
it's
is who
pretty
paid for the
tacky on
Washington
their
Post
part.
article to get written.
I think it's pretty tacky on their part. In that, does that mean any country we go to where it takes the Syrian name off of it? If it's someone we hate, even if it's justifiably hate, you're basically saying they're just showing video, just interfacing with the general public. No sound, no nothing. And basically, it sounds like from this article that if we go to a place where our particular country hates, all we are expected to do is show video of why we should hate the government or whatever, and you can't just show things the way they are and
Hey,
let people
Tyler,
make their own decision.
very briefly, are they paid for? Are they paid sponsored videos from is Syrian government paying for any of these?
that's the important question. I believe they would have to reveal that in some capacity, and they don't.
Right. So that's the part right there. Anytime you take money from a foreign government, regardless of the purpose, it doesn't matter if it's pro, anti, anything. Anytime you take money from another government, your whole home government will raise some eyebrows. Historically, this is how you do influence over the other countries with stuff. Now, it's not that it means that you can't do it. You will get attention though. That's regardless of where you're sorting it from.
Well, that's pretty easy. I mean, you also become sort of a foreign agent, but I'm just talking in general.
It is true, though. There has been a lot of influencers, even actually some of the reviews, a lot of travelers have been saying about countries. Apparently, they were just, we thought that they were everyday, everyday Joe who goes out and have a great tourism experience. But apparently, they are actually paid, even though they are not saying it. So a lot of governments are paying them, and then that they are showing the tourism and other good parts of the most of the country. So they don't even say they are influencers. They are actually putting and positioning themselves to be like like me and you guys, like any everyday Joe having a great experience visiting a country, just the way I said it about Syria, that I have been there. And there are a lot of people who are getting paid to say those things. Yeah.
Did you get paid to say that?
Absolutely not, but I'm just saying.
I got to ask with love, right? It's all with love.
Absolutely not. No, but that's why I did point it out. I just went actually. I had a friend who, in my master's class, he was Syrian. So I said, "Can I come?" And I just went. And I just went, Middle East tour backpacking. And that was just my personal experience. Not none. I didn't even do any influencing. Trust me, I'm not good at those things. But I was shocked because I was one of those people before traveling to a new place that I haven't been before. I do look into reviews and I try to see reviews by everyday Joys so that they are not being influenced by others to say things that may not be true. So I have been looking into it, and I was really shocked when I saw a documentary. Actually, a lot of people, the way I just said it right now, or others who have been saying things and putting reviews and other things, actually are being paid by governments and sponsors behind the scene. So I thought I should point out,
You
but
know,
not
there's
me.
another strategy, whether being paid by the government or not. If you're like, very well versed in terms of the actual YouTubing, you just turn up in any country. Doesn't matter which country is that, whether it's war torn or whether it's like middle of Africa or anything like that. If you have a white skin and you are from the States and you are from Europe, you just turn up, land in any country, and then effectively just make like a couple of minutes or 10-minute documentary on that, on your travel experience, and publish that. The people from that country is just going to actually, binge watch it, and they would just circulate it the way they wouldn't be able to actually circulate their own videos. So just by making 2 3 videos, you'll be able to actually earn tons of money just by the YouTube, because those people is going to be actually propagating that these people actually come from the Western countries and they've been talking in English and they've been interacting, walking into their houses, interacting with their kids and all that. And that's the image you usually want to portray about the country. But for the YouTuber, to begin with, any guy would or girl would just turn up in any country and do that experience, just like traveling, hitchhiking, and all that kind of thing, and put together, publish that on YouTube, and all the people you have met, just get them to like that, watch it, and they'll circulate it. And by literally a couple of weeks, you will have like thousands of people actually watch that YouTube video. And that's how you can earn tons of money from that. You don't even have to go to the government to actually pay for it. That cycle actually begins once you get well known in that community. So after visiting like a couple of times or 3 times, then they'll start to get to know you. And at that point in time, government wants to actually get you involved in that, become like, okay, see, XYZ has turned up in our country and they have made such a great video, and they try to actually engage with you at that point in time. Literally, many people, tons of people have actually done that, and now they have, a few million subscribers on their YouTube.
Thank you for the tip. I think I'm gonna do that next time because I just actually just popped in when I was in London just last month. I had a few spare days. I popped in into Prague and I was doing all these things for free. So maybe I'll try to monetize. Thanks for the tip.
Yeah. The numbers that I've heard is about 1,000 subscribers on your YouTube or your social media, and then just hit up the embassy of where you're traveling, and they sometimes have outreach programs. China specifically does a lot of outreach here within Canada, and just the other day, a friend of mine was telling me that he gets paid to do positive spin on Chinese stories on social media, but he's a Canadian resident. So I found that to be rather interesting. So it's quite distributed as well.
Well, China didn't create all this, so the door swings both ways. There's probably a lot of other countries doing the same thing. Everybody wants to show their best foot forward. If they don't have to pay for it, fine. If they do have to pay for it, they figure it out.
I've just read the whole article, and it's making the point that the Assad regime tried to campaign to bring in journalists to tell happy stories, and the journalists that did come were far more critical, and so that didn't work. So now they've brought in the YouTubers who are naive and not being critical, basically. And this journalist takes issue with that these YouTubers are not critical and they're just running around kind of uh, naive and not knowing and not saying what they should be saying. And it says it's clear. The last paragraph says it's clear these influencers don't want to deal with the political and ethical implications of their travel. We can't police people's consciences, but we can question whether the companies sponsoring such tourism, and here they're talking about the VPNs again, Surfshark and whatnot. But we can question whether the companies sponsoring such tourism are violating the sanctions placed on the regime because of its human rights violations. So it sounds it's that tone of that last paragraph almost sounds like the journalist of this article is using the Wall Street Journal because they have an agenda and they want to go after the sponsors of content on YouTube that doesn't, go the direction that they would like it to go. Although I
It could
just
also be a gentle reminder that that whether Facebook is hiring all these content moderators that work for State Department, former NSA type folks for information, etc. When Facebook's hiring them in large quantities, maybe Google needs to hire a few more to make sure they can deal with that problem, and maybe make sure some other State Department things are lined up with essentially on the private sector activity.
here's my issue. So it says while the value of such tourism to the regime is obvious, because that's what's likely to come from these videos, it is more troubling that many posts have been sponsored by Western companies. Duolingo, which is a learning app for kids, by the way, which an amazing learning app, by the way. Surfshark, which is a VPN, and Skillshare have all sponsored videos produced during these atrocity safaris. Well, there you just exposed yourself again by calling them atrocity safaris. Anyway, Duolingo.
Tyler, do you think that these journalists just don't want the competition?
I think it's partly that exactly, but to name Duolingo and by name Surfshark and Skillshare as, and then end with the closing paragraph of, well, we can't do anything about these naive video vloggers, but we can go after the sponsors that you just named 2 paragraphs ago.
Why not?
Yeah, of course you can, but let's talk about you using the Wall Street Journal as an agenda platform. That it's you who has an agenda. The vlogger has no agenda. I've
Well,
watched. I've watched.
here's what I found. I went to the Middle East
But by the way, hang on.
in 26.
Sorry. Let me just put the cherry on top. Duolingo and Surfshark and Skillshare also do not have an agenda on this issue. Let's be very clear. Duolingo is not pro fucking Assad.
Oh,
Surfshark.
they have internal checks for that now. The PR department's in overdrive, damage control, and the legal team's going, are we actually liable for this? And I can guarantee you there's going to be things on it now, but they don't have an agenda going into this, sure.
Right, but the implication is, hey Duolingo, what do you have to say for yourself? And they're like, holy shit, what WTF, bro? Sorry, go
But
ahead.
what do you mean automated advertising selection, huh? It's like we didn't actually hand select all these things, but even then, it's a blogger, it's a YouTuber. Why
It's a
is this
policy
person
update.
being held at the level of a journalist? They're not the same, but from the public perspective, it's actually hard to tell for the average person. I would say in this room, we're very lucky and very fortunate to be able to distinguish between journalism and activism, but I don't think it's always as clear cut as it seems. For
Look, this isn't that big a deal. Like Duolingo's a massive company with things. They have the standard thing for your marketing spend. You go, do we want to have this next to a porn website? Do we want it next to a neo-Nazi? Are we on a State Department ban list, etc.? It's a standard process stuff. They have to do it for any time a certain amount of money is spent on anything interacting with public sponsorship going outside the company. It goes through a legal review, it goes through a branding review. This is just normal. So what literally they can just say, very truthfully, is we've updated our policy internally because we realized this slipped through the cracks. Okay, we fixed it. There, it's not a big deal. It's just essentially if it's not even brought to attention, it's kind of difficult to fix that kind of thing. And that way, I think this,
Exactly. That's
even
why I
though
said automated. That's why I said it's an automated system. It's an automated process. It's a mistake.
it's
Oh, it
literally
no,
a button
that
click away.
automated process does not. You don't see Duolingo ads for kids next to porn ad sites next to the neo-Nazi stuff, and I can guarantee you when that does happen, oh man, there's hell to pay. That automated system still has those checks. You still have those same
Or
financial
now
disclosure
we'll
things,
have
anti
those
money
checks.
laundering, etc. That's still standard.
It will
But,
get new additional checks now, though. So that's the point, I think.
okay, but that's a clear binary black and white example, rather stark example. This example is not. It's anything but black and white. These are just vloggers showing how lovely Syrian people are. That's a very gray area as to should a brand feel
Are
any
they
good.
on state-sponsored media? On there, are you co-sponsoring with a group that is on the unfriendly list on state-sponsored media? That's actually that's a simple binary list. There's only 270
That is
countries,
binary.
and about 50 of them are on the shit list at any one time.
The only real action that the government plays a role in this that they can really clearly point to is that the government approves their doing it, which of course they
Yep,
would have to do. You couldn't go into Syria and do this without the government's approval.
that is the thing in certain areas.
But I think couldn't like I don't know about the bloggers or anything, but couldn't anybody go there? I mean, I did. I was just a tourist, and
And
then you
anyone would have to be approved to go there. Yeah,
yeah, I just got a visa and then
that's
I
my
just
point. Is
went there.
these vloggers being approved doesn't. There's no smoking gun there. That of course they have to be approved to go there. That's
Yeah, I'm just wondering. I guess if they're bloggers and if they are going for that specific purpose of saying flowering things, there could be a point. But I was just wondering if anybody
Chris's
goes
point.
there as a
If,
tourist and then say nice things about it because
if
it's
they were
nice.
if they were in any way being remunerated or compensated beyond just being approved to go there, then that needs to be very well known. And I imagine that they would have to reveal that. And I imagine many of them would. I imagine the vloggers themselves, as a small community, at least when I was doing it at YouTube in the early days, it was an incredibly small community. If somebody was taking pay from and in a scenario like this, the other vloggers would out them and be like, "Hey, that's a scam. This person just lost all their credibility because they're being paid by that brand and they're not
And
disclosing
they
it."
can do auditing for that as well.
That my point is I highly doubt that these quote unquote vloggers are being compensated beyond just being approved to go make the content there. They do go a little further in the article and say that they are given a state assigned minder, usually in the guise of a translator. Well, that's not
That's
true.
pretty normal when you go to many places with stuff when you end up
True.
signing up for saying I'm a journalist. If you're a journalist and you say I'm there at the visa border thing and say where are you in country for, I'm here to do a report, it's like, okay, cool, well here's the person that would like to make sure that you get to where you need to go, and
Right.
by the way they'll make sure that you're going to certain places. I mean that's standard in a lot of countries.
But it's not true of the one that I saw, because the person goes to great lengths to reveal everyone who's traveling in the entourage at all times. And if there was an additional person that they didn't know rather intimately, and they outlined all the persons in the entourage and how they met and all of that and everything. And so that doesn't hold up to my own the videos that I saw. I want to get back to Dr. Fran because I interrupted her as we were making this point.
Dr. Francine.
Dr. Francine, thank you.
Ooh.
Is she on stage?
She's not on stage. Yeah.
Oh,
She's not.
yeah.
Okay,
Just
sorry about
announced.
that.
She left the stage.
Okay, let her know. I tried to circle back. Okay, so next big article is from Bloomberg. They say they have sources that Beijing has grown frustrated with a years-long failure to develop semiconductors that can replace U.S. chips, capped by anti-graft probes into top execs, which we read about 24, 48 hours ago now.
Keep in mind, there are articles that are coming out a few years ago saying China will never have any sort of deep blue navy. They have no naval capability to project stuff, and there's no capability of them building this within any appreciable time frames. China is not capable of building a high-speed rail. They can only copy and paste from other countries with things. And if they do so, look, here's a fake image that a photographer took of an antelope. Therefore, the entire system is fake. I get really uneasy when groups say China can't do this, or China does this, or China can't do that. They do not hold up very well in hindsight from seeing essentially what actually ends up happening.
Meanwhile, they've been making our iPhones this whole time. It's like, come again? I'm sorry. If you don't think you're going to be putting together 1,000 iPhones in the future, or your descendants will per day, you're just not hardworking enough to keep up with these folks. These people want to get ahead, and the plan is something like, hey, we're not thinking 4 years ahead. We're thinking 50, 100 years. And I remember Elizabeth Warren once met with the Chinese general, and she talked about it on Stephen Colbert, and she said that that was one of the most shocking things, that they were laughing at us because we're just arguing. Meanwhile, they're engineering solutions. Engineering is trial and rinse and repeat, fix. You got to go through iterations, so you don't always get it right. And America seems to forget about its history and huge industrial failures and other things because there wasn't as much media coverage back then. So it's a great point, Chris.
Another thing I don't understand, I don't know whether Chris can actually comment on that. You know, they were able to indigenously develop 5G and 6G they are working on and send all the rockets in the space.
If
And
by indigenous you mean Canada and these partners, then yeah.
That one's there is indigenous Chinese technology. I would cite a different one. That is not a good stack to cite.
so
Okay.
all their, rockets they are firing over the Taiwan right now is just like using some other people's chips, some other countries' chips.
Qualcomm's
No,
had a
not
monopoly on the IP
necessarily.
patents behind that. The research was conducted USA America, the little bit of Europe stuff going in there. 5G is just a political nightmare with things. There's other technologies that are a little cleaner to cite the provenance on.
So the author says on Twitter that China's leadership is growing frustrated with progress in the domestic chip industry, leaving it vulnerable to U.S. sanctions, which is very true. And that certainly is one of their main reasons for wanting to.
I think, Tyler, that is referring to that 5 nanometer and 12 nanometer. The SMC has got the 12 nanometer, and the
All kinds.
TSMC is
The
working on 5.
the 5G chips alone are driving them batshit crazy because they have sanctions on that, and China doesn't have domestic 5G chips, and they've got all the cell phone towers, but the phones don't have the chips. That's an embarrassment and in the pocket of every Chinese person walking around as to why they don't have 5G when they've got a million 5G antennas on every street corner.
Antennas are easier to engineer than the full chip stack if
Well,
they're doing all the other components.
that and they cloned it. Yeah, they deconstructed the Ericsson tower antennas in Stockholm. Tens of billions of dollars have been invested without the breakthrough expected, leading to corruption probes, which we read about recently.
And I think now they've increased it to 1.4 trillion or something like that. Xi Jinping is pushing even more for semiconductors, despite all of this controversy. So that's very
How much are
exciting.
they
But
allocating?
I think 1.4 trillion from 1 trillion.
Holy shit!
Yeah.
I need to look that up.
So
We just put
we should be afraid.
that's not that can't be right. I need to look this up. Okay.
One source this morning. I'll try to look it up.
But for context, in the USA, we just passed the CHIPS Act, and everyone's doing backflips, saying, "Look, we've got $50 billion or $70 billion, depending on how you're going to
Exactly.
measure it."
Exactly.
But it's tax breaks. That's very different from just saying you're going to give it now. You can go do it secondhand with the bank, but that's like great. 1 year of TSMC, a single semiconductor company's revenue. That's not. And by the way, they've been asking for this for about 12 years. So, and it's going to be distributed in the next 5 to 10. So this isn't even necessarily a stimulus subsidy. This is maintenance bill. Well, there's 12 other governments that are actually putting equal or more amounts into their own industry. So at that point, it's not even like maintenance. That's just basic, like just keeping industry competitive, essentially from a market exports perspective. Um, we have electrical engineers are one of the least trained engineering professions, specifically the semiconductor engineering stuff. We almost skipped a generation, not quite as bad as nuclear, where we just didn't train 2 or 3 generations of nuclear engineer, but electrical engineering, specifically for the variety that you're using for chip fabrication. There's only like a handful, like 4 or 5 different schools you can actually do so domestically USA that are at the level that you can actually go into a full program with. And the reason why it's significant is that those schools are small, they're tiny. If we're going to say we want to be chip manufacturers of the future, we have to train that talent like yesterday. And that has to be double time. Instead, you have Congress arguing with Intel about whether or not they're going to spend X number of billions of dollars on which fab in a desert somewhere, which will be mostly automated, by the way. There'll be a handful of engineers that design it. They'll put some robots, spend $10 billion, and then poof, it exists. But that's not the job generator of the future, so they don't allocate it to the at the university level. The reason why it's a big deal is regardless of how many people are employed, the fact is you need to have a certain quantity even to build them to begin with. And if China's willing to say that they're going to pump out 1 million engineers per year, regardless of essentially if it's mechanical, civil, semiconductor, whatever, and then Obama's on the stage, was like 8 years ago or 9 years ago, he's saying, look, we're going to graduate 50,000 engineers a year. This is great. China has a larger population than USA, but just from a ratio perspective, this is a huge difference on priorities and how much we're allocating resource wise. And we have a bunch of people that are underskilled right now that are in some jobs they don't want, that we don't actually need for society. We could automate them, but it's just we just keep them around because reasons. We could massively reskill for this, but that takes leadership, and that's not something we have in a Congress. That's basically the average age is over 70. Like we're waiting for they're like 1 foot in the grave and one foot in their stock holdings for the companies they're investing in while they're legislating on it. Until we actually get actual leadership in place, it's going to be difficult to do coordinated actions like the China Central Party can pull off.
Is that
Fortunately,
leadership,
we got to lead the
Chris?
time, but it's challenging.
Hey, Chris. Yeah, I agree that it's leadership, but isn't it choice? We have, in I'm just talking about the U.S. right now. There's tons of people who could choose some of these fields, and they're opting not to go into these fields.
They're opting for a University of YouTube instead.
They're opting for
Exactly.
jobs that pay. If you aren't going to pay your if you can go get a software coding stuff with less than 12 months worth of training from I know nothing about coding to I'm making a six-figure salary job. If you do some one of these like General Assembly style stuff, yeah, they'll take 20% of your first year's wages, but you know what? You're working at Google. That's very different from working into semiconductors where it's like, yeah, we don't feel like hiring for the next, I don't know, 4 or 5 years because we're kind of because some bean counters over at AMD, they felt like they could just save a few more pennies, and they laid off their experienced crew. And maybe we can bring you on board like 3 or 4 years from now. Oh, and by the way, we will pay you 200 grand once you join us, but that's once you're a senior engineer. Can you
And it
start off at
Bob.
like with your
Yeah, but
student
what
debt
I'm
of
talking about
20%?
is college degrees. What people are choosing, when people are
They will
what
choose
they're
the things that
motivated to,
pay.
but that's still a choice.
No, people are choosing, like a recent survey of kids in China versus the US. Number one in the US, kids wanted to be a YouTuber. In China, number one, kids wanted to be astronauts. So, and shout out to Asianometry, which is the YouTube channel for the reference of the number that I gave for China's semiconductor push. So,
Hey, Chris, I think the chips bill actually, apart from the money, the 55 billion for fabs, whatever, there is money in the rest of the bill. I don't know how much because the rest of the bill's larger than the 55 billion, though, for kind of just education, what you're talking
That
about.
is true.
Okay, yeah.
That is true. It takes years to spin one of these things up, though. And this is why I'm saying it's basic maintenance versus like aggressive industry policy. We've been sitting on our laurels for so long. Intel missed two generations worth of upgrades just from internal technical failure because they spent their time essentially doing stock buybacks rather than actually investing in their own company. And by the way, on the same day, I'm sorry, it's not the same day, same week that the Chips Act passed essentially from the recent from the Senate, Intel announced another stock buyback for their internal employees. I'm sorry, for their internal stock magic with stuff. So just look into it. Stock buybacks, Intel. It's insane because, and if you look at the quantity involved, it's absurd. It's like the airlines all over again. It's
why
like if the
would
government's
they
actually going to
buy
spend money,
back
they
the
need.
stock, Chris, why would they buy back the stock though now? Like I know the stock is cheaper now, but what's the
Stock buybacks when they're subsidized by government subsidies de facto transfer wealth from the public sector from publicly collected taxes, and they put it into essentially the largest shareholders. Sometimes it's essentially some of the banks. Sometimes that's essentially like the original like founders. Sometimes that's essentially the CEO, etc. But it's not the people that actually build anything. It's mostly the groups that are in the ownership positions, which de facto concentrates on the extreme high end of the wealth spectrum. The problem with this is that when they're telling we want to sponsor these industries to make them competitive, they're selling it to the public under the idea of saying we're going to raise jobs, we're going to essentially increase manufacturing capacity, etc. But then they give them the money, and then it just goes into essentially like some golden parachutes for incompetence in management. That's the real problem. It's not necessarily the money gets spent on that, which is, that's their right to do as a stock holding company. But when you start taking public subsidies for that, now we're in a very different ballpark. It's kind of similar back into 2008 when they had a bunch of banks that took public money for essentially bailouts, and then paid their executives who secured those bailouts large golden parachutes during the same time period. It's the same sort of shit that goes on there. It's not a problem, but once you start crossing the private and public sector, then it becomes a problem.
Well, actually, Chris, I mean, so to add on to that, though, even if there was no public money involved, the issue with the reason they do stock buybacks is because these top executives usually have relatively limited tenures. They don't have 20, 30 year tenures at their position, and the stock buybacks, make Wall Street happy. They help move the stock in the short term, which helps move the value of their option packages. And so the problem is that it gives the wrong incentives because the CEOs are not really there long enough that they could benefit from a 20-year time horizon. And so I'll leave it there.
The money
Yeah.
goes up and down, but
So
the
Kev, I
factories
was
that
going to
physically
add.
built out everything. Sorry.
So I was going to add, isn't it also the shareholders might pressure them that, well, if you're not innovating and you're not investing in the next best chip, or you don't think you're competitive, you should return the money. You should give us the money, right? As in, you should buy back the stock to increase the stock value or pay dividends, because they run out of ideas, right? This is like Apple. If they can't find another new iPhone killer or something like that to kind of disrupt what they're doing now, or the next $1 billion or $10 billion idea, the best use of that capital, if they can't invest it, is to give it back to shareholders. Isn't that the argument that shareholders typically also press on the management? It's like, hey, if you're not able to invest that money, then into any profitable projects for the long run, then give it back, give us the money, basically.
The easiest and fastest ways of fluffing a golden parachute and the easiest ways of generating immediate value for shareholders is to kill your R&D department. It will not have any immediate effect on your sales and prospects. It will kill off your future ones, though. However, if your horizon as a CEO, as senior management, as leadership, as a long holding shareholder, etc., but the long holding is only a 5-year time frame, etc., that R&D won't have its fruits for a while. In the meanwhile, in the immediate effect, you get a big fat bonus cash thing. You get a lot of PR, flashy PR. You can do a spin-off thing. You can announce new partnerships, etc. You can do all sorts of fancy maneuvers on the finance side. What ended up happening is you killed your future, though, just a little bit at a time. But what happens is that you end up getting to this competitive death spiral where you look at all of the things that are generating money for your company. And you say, that one's only generating 5% growth. I've got this division that's generating 20%. Obviously, the 5% growth one, we just needed to spin that thing off because it's not doing anything useful. Oh, let's spin off this 10% one. That's not doing anything useful. And every internal division needs to have 20% growth year over year. Now, the things you're spelling off and spinning off, that's where all the young guys in the company go. That's where essentially all of your new ideas, all of your incubators for all your future R&D stuff is. And guess what just sailed out the door? You end up becoming an HP printer company if you do that strategy.
Or
Because
the next IBM, right? It's like
yeah,
IBM
exactly.
went to the next HP, the next IBM. You let ARM, Nvidia, and all those others run circles around you. You're just trying to milk the Intel, whatever Pentium was like their last big innovation. I remember back in the day,
Yeah,
and then they were on x86 all this time, and ARM and Nvidia kind of run loops around them now. And of course,
that's
Apple makes their
exactly
own
what
chips.
happens. And
Apple
you
making
won't
their
see
own
the
chips is
effect for
probably the
decades.
biggest signal that they're losing it, right?
The decision, if you want to see who's successful in the market right now, don't look at what they're doing right now. Look at what they were doing 10, 15 years ago. Often they had to make a painful decision during something, and some people suffered to make it happen. Either they pulled extra long hours, the CEO went without essentially some extra paycheck. They made some really difficult market acquisition. That there's things where you have to actually tighten your belt and actually do stuff, and it takes a lot of work to do so. Once you pull it off, most of the groups that create those things are not actually around to benefit from them. That's the whole point of investment. The whole point of essentially laying down groundwork for groups that come after. It's this sort of social safety net or a business safety net version equivalent of saying we're going to make investments because the future deserves it. But when you're willing to rob from the future just for immediate short-term benefit, you don't get that. And that's a problem if it's one company, but when it becomes an entire industry, and every Harvard MBA that comes out with some lean manufacturing, kill your inventory, make your supply chain as short as possible, sell off your R&D division, make essentially Wall Street happy for your shareholder reports, quarter by quarter by quarter. You will basically, it's a death by a thousand cuts. That's a very different model from saying, let's plan the next 50 years out and then take every last action we can to make sure that we're not shortchanging the future. Very different mindset, and the cumulative effects will catch up with us.
Yeah, but Ken, you're right, but Ken also really captured it, because it's all about me, right? And so, Ken, you nailed it when you're talking about buybacks, and it's beyond the buybacks.
Okay, so next up is Oppo and OnePlus halt sales in Germany after a court found last month that both Chinese smartphone companies used 5G without paying for the appropriate patents. From Nokia, by the way, out of Finland. Um,
And by the way, Nothing Phone is also from this. I think they have the same producer, because I think Nothing Phone is spin off from OnePlus.
no.
Yes, it is. If you look at the history, I've already checked once already. It's all related. Nothing Plus, their company, anyway, is very shady. I already checked it once. It's in the back channel if you want to check the history.
The
Isn't
one,
it the former team members, not necessarily a spin out as in directly tied, right? The founder of
No,
what
it is
Nothing
impossible
Phone
for
is a
them to
former
start something
OnePlus.
within 1 year. You just check this company called BKK, and then you check, I think, okay, Nothing Phone, I think the original investors are out from, as in this one company from the Cayman Island. So they keep it a secret.
but the OnePlus isn't named in this suit. I'm sorry,
This
OnePlus
article?
is.
Yes, it is,
Nothing.
yes.
Nothing is named in the lawsuit.
No,
That,
it's not in a lawsuit, but if you trace back, right, they definitely have a connection with this company.
yeah, it's the same co-founder, Carl
Okay,
Pei.
you just go and check. Okay, Nothing Phone is not a Swedish company. It's a Chinese company.
I'm not saying it's a Swedish company. What I'm saying is the headline is that Oppo and OnePlus stopped sales in Germany because they lost a lawsuit. That has nothing to do with the Nothing company whatsoever.
They lost the lawsuit because they are using Nokia's patent, right? So what
They're
I'm
not.
saying
They're
is
not.
Nothing Phone's product is also from the same production line.
Wouldn't matter. They're not named in the lawsuit.
Yes, not now. Or I say not
So
yet.
what's the chain of custody? So it's because it was made in the same factory without where the factory had to be licensed, Cheryl? Is that the issue?
No, it's the same company. They just use different company names. So just check it. It's the same investors, ultimately the same owner.
Oh, so it's like
They're
musical
not the
chairs,
same
but with
investors.
their names.
They're not at all the same investors. The investors in Nothing are my literal closest, dearest friends in my life.
Okay, I will send you something on the back channel. You can check later. Those are the newest investors, but during the incorporation, it is a company. Well, the investor is
No,
from one that is registered
no,
out of
no.
Cayman
My
Island.
dear friends are
I
the
have the UK. I have the UK registration information. If you want to know, it's from the
Cheryl, the
UK
cap
government side.
table. I have. I nearly was in the first angel round investor myself.
Yes, that's after the incorporation, Tyler.
There's no money. I know the entire fundraising history of Nothing. There was no money prior to the angel round that I nearly participated in, and my friends did participate in. The company was not capitalized prior to that.
Okay, I'll send you something later. Then you check. Then we'll discuss this
But
another time.
more importantly, the Nothing phone couldn't have been named in this lawsuit because nobody knew when this lawsuit was happening a month ago. The phone came out on July 12th. This lawsuit also happened in that same week. So the lawsuit decision was made when the specs for the phone were released.
Yes. So it's not released, right? It's not.
The
They
phone
haven't even
wasn't
sell
even
Nothing Phone yet, right?
the
So
phone
once it
wasn't
sell in Germany, I think they will face the same fate. That's what I'm saying.
there. You can say that. You can totally guess that. You can make a wild guess like that. But that's all you have is a wild guess that that's what's going to happen. But so far, nothing has happened.
Yes.
There's nothing to know because they weren't named in the suit. They're not part of any suit. But you're guessing that because they have the same co-founder, Carl Pei of Nothing and OnePlus, that because they're the same co-founder, that the Nothing phone will also use the Nokia patents without paying for them. Which I would find, I would love to, I will happily wager with you any amount you would like to wager on that.
Ooh, spicy day today at Tech News Around the World. Tyler and Cheryl battle it out.
Well,
Uh,
all I know is I know nothing.
by the way, I will open that wager to anybody. Anybody beyond Cheryl who would like to make a wager on that.
Ding ding.
I can. Uh, I will happily. That's. I will happily make that bet.
Yeah, Tyler,
Where
isn't it fair to say
Isn't
that most phones use a collection of the same patents? It's whether they pay them out or not, and it's even if Nothing phone uses the similar patents, maybe they decide to pay for those, and they don't get in trouble. Versus maybe cutting
right?
corners for other brands, right?
Very true. Yeah, it's not. It. By the way, the negotiations can happen after the fact and whatnot. And in this case, Oppo and One Plus could pay whatever the court decides is the fair amount if they want to continue doing business in Germany. If they're
So
decide that it's not, they don't want to pay it, then they're going to have a hard time doing business in
yeah,
Germany.
so OnePlus, I understand because I'm a OnePlus user. I've had two of their phones, and my current OnePlus 7 Pro, which is like 3 years old now, it is not IP rated, and they chose not to IP rate it, although it is actually waterproof. They just chose to cut corners and not get pay for the whatever the
Certification.
certification that gives you the IP whatever
I,
rating.
yeah.
But this is by far a waterproof phone. I've had it for 3 or 4 years. Dropped it in a beach in like a foot of water, and it's fine. But I know OnePlus likes to cut corners like this.
Okay.
I
Well,
can't believe you have a 3-year-old phone. That is 3 years old. How do you manage?
Challenges. I have a very brief addendum to an earlier thing where there was it was said that 1.4 trillion was allocated to China's semiconductor. I found the source for that. It actually that was 1.4 trillion for the overall spending package that they passed a year or two ago. 150 billion of that 2 years ago was allocated for semiconductor specifically, and that compares to the 50 to 70 trillion, depending on how, I'm sorry, 50 to 70 billion dollars that USA just committed to domestically with the CHIPS Act. So it's a little bit closer to that. It's not the order of magnitude more. It's in the same range. So I just wanted to just do a quick little an update on that one.
Thanks for checking into that. Yeah, really appreciate it.
I did have to look through a number of sources. It took because that misinformation, not misinformation. Journalists they confuse trillion and billion a lot. So it was cited from a lot of different places. I had to go through the second page before I found the original source. So
I'll make
I
sure
could
to
see how the mistake was made.
if you pass on the source, I'll make sure to
Yeah,
pass
it's there.
the
It's there in the chat.
Agenometry person on YouTube because it's a YouTube channel where I got that info from. So I'll make sure
Excellent.
to make that correction in the comments. And that a particular person, that particular YouTuber, makes corrections in their subsequent videos about things like that. So if you can share that source, I'll make sure to pass that on.
Excellent. It's in your chat and in the group chat as well.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is Snapchat rolls out parental controls through a new family center feature, letting parents see who teens are talking to but not view the content of the messages. And the Department
What
of
are we doing?
Justice.
Like an Edward Snowden type trace here? It's like you can see who they're talking to, not what about. And I don't think that that's actually that useful, especially given that children are so vulnerable. But I don't have children, so I don't know what the fears and concerns of modern day parents are. But I would think content or the content of the conversations would be more important.
Once you have kids, you become pro surveillance, pro police state. It automatically just becomes you become pro everything that the spy agencies do. Apparently it's the way logic goes.
The Department of Justice says that BitMEX's head of business development pleaded guilty to violating U.S. federal anti-money laundering rules and will pay a fine of $150,000.
That's not a lot of
Bloomberg,
money.
As
Bloomberg,
opposed to the Huawei CFO who had to
go through extradition type issues and all that stuff, right? Pay a fine? No, no, no. But you, so like I would ask, why was that the case there?
Okay, Amazon's planned acquisition of iRobot and One Medical are emblematic of Andy Jassy's hunt for a so-called fourth pillar beyond AWS Prime and Marketplace. Well, okay, yeah, Brad, that's one way to frame it, sure. Shopic, which offers an AI-powered shopping cart clip-on device to identify items, raises $35 million by Qualcomm. That's kind of genius,
Very much so.
turns any dumb shopping cart into a smart shopping cart that can detect what's in the shopping cart.
They
That's
could scale that out fast, and then they say, hey, you want to compete with Amazon Go stores? Yeah, they've got like 10,000 sensors in the roof. You have like 100 on your shopping carts that cost you a fraction of the amount of money, and it gives you about 80% of the capabilities. Also, you can sell the marketing data back to upstream to all the grocery, to all the people that supply essentially the packaged consumer goods and stuff. Yeah, that'd be, and modern computer vision has gotten so cheap to do on the edge. If you want to do this like 5 or 6 years ago, it actually would have been somewhat expensive and somewhat substantial with the amount of uptime, and just even maintain the libraries would be a pain. By now, the computer vision stuff is freaking cheap. You can run it on, tiny little like $4, $40 or little units, and you get something that's pretty freaking amazing. Even better for grocery store specifically, it's something you could do unlike almost any
Only
other
if there
industry.
wasn't a chip shortage, though.
That is true. That is true. Um, uh, this particular kind of chip, there's a way to do it. Most of the chip shortages were in the low end side of things for things like power controllers, things that essentially do like windshield wipers and stuff. The higher end side of the spectrum, actually, they kept their slots, especially for the consumer electronics side. It's mostly the power side for essentially the older generation fabs that had the chip shortage.
Well, I've been
It,
trying to
it,
get
it does
compute
spill over.
modules, and the lead time is something like 25 weeks. So I don't know how anyone can get anything right now unless you ordered it like a year or two
Oh,
ago.
oh, oh, it's more like 25 months for microcontrollers. I actually did do a survey of this recently where we were looking at a component, and we had to go through. I went through 14 different online vendors for microchips, and 95% of their stuff was out of stock, which is astounding. Essentially, how bad the chip shortage is in many respects. But for this specific application, you could do it if you're really smart about it, and that's essentially depends on whether or not, because what happened is the semiconductors. For a very, very brief thing, it's getting a little bit off topic, but I'll be very brief. The car industry, essentially the automotive industry, along with the several others, they said we'd like to save 3 cents per chip. And then the chip manufacturer said, if you do that, we won't sell to you because there's other people lined up to buy it. The car company said, "Oh, we hear that all the time from our vendors, but we're a big industry. We're one of the biggest industries in the world. We screw over our vendors all the time. You know what? How about we say we're going to give those slots and we'll let them to sweat for a little bit, and they can come crawling back to us, and then we'll get a few cents off on these things." Keep in mind, like there's when you're buying 100,000 of a unit that only costs 20 cents a piece, that's not a lot of money altogether. However, the problem is the semiconductor people went like, okay, well, let's get this for the consumer electronics. Everyone's doing COVID buying sprees. The car companies come back and they go, okay, well, we're ready to guide those chips. They're like, dude, we gave those away. The next fab opening is the next 2 years. And the car companies are like, what the shit? We need these to make our cars. We literally cannot make our cars. We're selling these for 30, 50 grand. We don't have these 20-cent parts. How do we make our cars? Like, that's not our problem. That's your problem. And they're like, oh, we'll make it everyone else's problem. And so Biden's up there talking about solving the chip shortage. And everyone's talking about, the grand geopolitics, China versus USA and all. And they have to go electric for everything because they have to remake all their car manufacturing lines because they got things sitting out there they can't essentially finish the parts for, and they won't never have the stock for. I mean, it's the amount of cluster frack is amazing, but a lot of it has nothing to do with actually chips. It's basically very poor supply chain management that went into that. Chips are just a side effect of the fact that occurred. Now, the spending they're doing on chips will help solve that, but it's only one aspect. All right, one brief little thing before the grocery store, and I'll turn it back over to Tyler. The one thing you can do with computer vision that's really, really interesting in the grocery store environment is you can actually do something called planograms. Now, planograms are essentially, instead of saying, hey, let's have the random shopkeeper just throw it up on the shelf and then hope the thing sells, it's like, no, no, no. We have consumer marketing. When you walk into the store, your cell phone is doing location tracking, not just GPS style, but it doesn't matter if you install like a little Angry Birds app or essentially like some Bible app or something to tell you the weather. It's all leaking your live telemetry data about every 5 to 10 seconds as you walk through the store. They have some of the most high amounts of spatial tracking for their customers as anyone else. They do a combination of Bluetooth. There's this thing sensing live data coming off from the GPS, but you can also do really, really wacky, cool stuff that you don't do in other environments, like magnetic fields and stuff like that. That requires you to scan the store ahead of time, but if you only have 800 locations, it's pretty easy to do. A lot of people don't realize this is data you can actually exfiltrate from phones, much less use them for spatial tracking. But if you spent 10 more seconds in front of that advertisement for that wall-to-ceiling ad, and you watched it, guess whose time codes just got
So now
transcribed
you
and
got to
gets
go
a
on
push
airplane
notification
mode.
later?
So the solution is airplane mode when shopping.
Well, it would, except the problem is they also have the facial recognition system starting to kick in. Those are newer; they don't have those as many places, and there are some state by state privacy things which slow it down a little bit. But it's getting increasingly difficult to exfiltrate data essentially in a way that or protect from exfiltration of data because there's just so many sensors. The more sensors you put in, it's like, yeah, you stop that one. What about the 12 others? You know, that kind of thing. But the cool thing you can do with the planograms is they have 3D models they make of the entire store for every deployment. This is standard for essentially from Safeway, from Target, Walmart, whatever. If you can name it, they probably already have this. And what's cool about this is it basically says by position every single spot on the shelves, and they have run simulation models. They have compared this against A/B testing against all their different stores, and they make mild tweaks to it, exactly coordinate with their ordering systems, distribution backend, logistics, how it's packed in the truck, where it arrives in the store. But the cool part is they're like, you know what? These 3D models, they don't have to suck. We could actually make them kind of pretty. And so what they did is they did full high res scans of every single little like laundry detergent thing of shampoo. By the way, please look this up on Google Images. Some of these software packages are incredible. I used to do 3D models professionally, and that was a fun thing that I did. To see essentially an automated warehouse infrastructure deployed essentially in consumer stores that they can essentially do dynamic layout modeling with, it's an extremely impressive technical achievement. But what this means is they actually have 3D models of every single item on all the shelves. They have high quality photographs of every single item, along with the sizing information, dimension information, weight calculations, etc. If you have even just a little bit of that trading data and you feed that into your computer vision model, you can guarantee that it will work. Most of the imprecision that comes with computer vision models comes from not knowing what you're scanning for. Am I looking for a hand? Am I looking for a dog? Am I looking for some lawnmower that someone left outside? It's very imprecise. It's impressive that we're able to do it at all, but it's actually working very well these days. But if you have this thing you're scanning for and you already know that in advance and say it's just going to do the products on the shelf, here's 10,000 high res scans for this, you can get near perfect. You can guarantee it works with like 99% precision type kind of levels. Even with lighting and the other things are typically not something you can control. Well, guess what? You're in a controlled environment. You can change the lighting. You can change the placement. Hell, you can even change the branding on the actual things to make them easier to computer vision scan. This is a very brilliant thing that they're doing by putting on the shopping carts. It would have been a little tricky to do 5 years ago, but right now is a perfect time to do this sort of thing because this is a microcosm what's happening with data being acting as a lubricant for commerce. And it's something that is the intersection of advanced edge computing technology, but also high-end databases that actually have done the legwork of acquiring the data sets required to train those models in advance. Most other industries don't have that advantage where they collected their data sets and they didn't know what to do with them. Grocery guys, they have always been a proponent of big data stuff, and they have the processing power to do it, and they have the legwork, and they're ready to adopt this stuff. So it's going to be exciting to see what they do with that. Is this a nightmare for piracy? Of course. That's what I'm saying. Is it impressive from a technical perspective? Oh, hell yeah. It's worth studying because some of these things can be adapted to other contexts that basically might not be consumer shopping, but you might have similar versions for laying at your factory with digital twins. You might have similar types of technologies for saying arranging like a playground kindergarten for maximizing learning engagement. You can do all sorts of cool shit. It's almost kind of sad that we only use it just to sell people shit. You can do these things to actually amplify human creativity, manufacturing capacity, etc. There's lots of cool stuff in this direction. Anyways, I've talked too much, but yeah, there's some cool stuff in
Well,
there.
Chris,
Chris, I wanted to,
thanks for the
Ross.
plug for real quick. Especially since you were talking my industry. Thanks for the plug for my industry, and you young people out there, don't bypass the old food, bev, and retail industry. There's more things happening there than you think. That is tech. You just got to get in the right spot.
AV Bev's a great dev group. They've got some amazing technology they're sponsoring.
Yeah, I always wanted to ask Chris and Ben what kind of chip they have got installed which can let them speak that fast. Seriously, I want to actually have that chip.
It must be next generation Neuralink.
No,
Okay.
seriously. I mean, how did you master it, Chris? And Ben, the same way, is the British version of it.
Oh, come
Never
on, you can't
shut up
accuse
as a
me of
kid.
speaking fast. I can't believe you're saying that. That's horrendous. What are you talking about? I never speak fast
Uh,
at all. I speak really slowly. What's wrong with talking fast? I remember I had a teacher at school called Mr. Weaver that he spoke really fast. He could just keep speaking at the speed all day, and it was amazing. I couldn't think, where are you getting the words
Speak
from? It's
slower,
absolutely
oh
please.
incredible.
my
Speak
God!
slower, please.
Here
It's
we
not
go.
a speed competition, please, guys.
Pow,
Please
pow,
consider the
pow.
foreigners. Thank you. Pardon us.
Do you remember those early FedEx commercials?
Now we have that in the WhatsApp. Like you can
No, I
actually
haven't
multiply it
smashed
at
that, please.
1.5 and 2.
Okay. I found two really interesting ones. Russia, according to the New York Times, Russia has been rerouting internet traffic in the occupied Ukrainian territories, meaning the areas that Russia has um, captured or occupied. They are rerouting internet traffic through Russia so that they can block and censor the information. So they're now extending the Russian internet in essentially. They're extending the Russian internet into the occupied Ukrainian territories and then rerouting the internet through the Russian domestic networks, which is now blocking the uncensored information and services.
I mean, the alternative is they have to make their calls on Ukrainian cell phones because their radios didn't work because that was stolen off from the internal corruption. So they're having to make calls on Ukrainian cell phone networks, which the NSA helpfully assists Ukraine and say, by the way, the military commander general is right over here. He's using this cell phone right here. So Russia going, we need to have a communications network that actually says something relatively within something we can control. They might not have the towers, but if they can get essentially the Wi-Fi spots, maybe that gives them some degree of being able to coordinate.
Or if they shoot up those new Iranian satellites into space like they did today, so Russia helped launch an Iranian communications satellite into orbit, so that's
That
now.
helped.
By the way, what happened to the Starlink? What I mean, did we discuss it in the room? Like,
Yeah,
I mean,
he got branding. He got launched and say, "Hey, look, I've survived a nation state actor." And by the way, look, the USA essentially has basically given permission for me to launch tens of thousands of these things all across the planet. They now basically act as USA foreign policy in space.
And I think it
seriously.
was the whole program was 1,000 satellites to begin with from a decade ago in a request from or for proposals from DARPA. So to see the numbers of expected satellites go to the tens of thousands, and then for every 24 hours for us to have a very high resolution image and include whatever other sensor modules we might want, like radar, communications, and whatnot. So it's quite the achievement.
But
Yeah,
from the
I'm
Ukraine,
speaking. I'm speaking on Starlink right now. It took 5 minutes to set it up. It's awesome.
We have endorsements.
Mhm.
no, I was talking about the Ukrainian perspective. Like, I mean, after that, like launching it, I
Oh yeah,
mean, we
their
didn't.
mortar crews use it. They use it for calling in artillery strikes. It's great.
Hmm. So
Hey, could I just interject on a news story that at least I just saw? I think it's fresh,
go ahead, Ken.
tech related actually. The
Hot off
the
the presses.
the Vice President Harris apparently is going to be in Las Vegas tomorrow to speak to a steelworkers conference. And the interesting thing is, there's a hackers convention going on in Las
DEF
Vegas right
CON.
now,
The Black
and
Hat.
I am like amazed. I am amazed that her people are so unaware of that, because could you imagine, having, the vice president's communications hacked? You think they're going to have everything in Faraday bags? I mean, it's like she should be nowhere near Las Vegas when there's a hackers
Oh,
convention.
half the people that go to Black Hat or work for the government anyways. It's just a matter of essentially which one's the
More
fun.
than half.
Yeah,
More
but
than half.
but it only takes a few hackers, Chris, and Ken's right. It's swarming with those guys right now.
Ken's
Like
Oh,
last
absolutely
time,
right
to,
because the price
and
that it would go for is
people who
astronomical.
go to that conference, um, take burner phones if they take any phone at all, because they know that just being there is an invitation to getting completely exfiltrated and hacked.
Yeah,
I will
well,
get
And
the
there's
those are the
always
people
a
in
hackers
industry, John.
conference in Las Vegas.
Typically the vice president of the United States is not present in Las Vegas when those things are going on.
well,
So
the
this,
NSA director usually is. The NSA director usually gives a speech at
yep.
those conferences. But with
really
respect to
okay,
what happened
okay.
one year they actually flew a drone that intercepted and took over the cell phone tower
Nice.
communication and just ripped like 7,000 credentials, and the person presented it at their DEF CON talk, which was awesome. He's like, oh, and by the way, here's a list of users that need to change their passwords.
No, and Ken, I was completely agreeing with you that it is a dangerous place for a high-level politician to go unaware that they're going to get hacked.
So I'll have egg on my face for saying this. Like when I said at the beginning of COVID that the government's competent and we're going to be just fine with things, and that did not turn out well. So I'm going to say it again here.
Power off.
She had the vice president and the president have some of the best executive security,
Power
especially
on.
cybersecurity protection on the planet. If they can't travel anywhere domestically without having to worry about, oh no, that's an extra higher concentration, then we've got other problems with stuff. They'll be fine. Now that's going to be fun because then 24 hours later, Harris's phone gets hacked, and then I'll have to eat my words again. But at least on paper, it works out.
Hashtag
Hey,
emo.
Chris, can I ask you a quick question? How does this work? If I have to go down to the strip today and my phone is off, let's say I put my
It's
phone
never,
off, is it still hackable?
it's never off. There's a baseband radio
It's
essentially for the
off.
cell phone, separate from the other chips. Even when it's in airplane mode, that
Take the
other chip.
battery out, Ken.
Excuse
Even
me.
if you pull the battery, there are backup circuits.
Well, the antenna
Oh,
resonates
really?
a
Okay,
particular
thank
way.
you.
So
Okay.
the antenna itself acts as a particular signature. So all you have to do is ping the environment, and you get like a echo, and you're like, wait, what was that? Oh, that was Ken's phone, right? He
It's
just
even crazier than that because those wireless charging circuits and stuff that people have with things. This is not standard on most consumer cell phones, but I just wanted to say the brief little physics thing here is that when you have any radio signals going in the air, that actually is a very very tiny amount of actual like power in that. Not enough to power the full cell phone, but if you only need to do a little
like
bit,
LoRa. LoRa is a protocol that actually can run on ambient EM radiation. So if you just have some transmitter far away, you can actually boot up this repeater and ping data from a sensor module just at a very low energy cost. It's amazing.
now you're only talking like 32 bits like every like 2
Exactly,
minutes.
exactly. But
It's
that's enough.
tiny
That's
amounts of
enough
data.
to keep track of Ken. That's enough
That's
to keep
enough
track.
to keep track of people. It's enough to essentially do some things. Now here's the thing, it's absolutely insane that most people don't realize you can do. Your standard cell phone is not designed to do this at all. However, things like as an example, the speakers essentially that project sound. A lot of people don't realize that if you actually take power off of them, they actually act as microphones. And weirdly, you can do some weird things with that. They're not optimized for that. They're not designed for that, but it's something you can usually do. Now, in the same way, there's many sensors on your cell phone. Your cell phone is basically this hive of sensor tech. We just throw them onto the chips, and since the chips are cheap to make, we just put as many as we can. Everything like accelerometers, gyroscopes, magnetometers, GPS detectors, camera, etc. There's so many on there, and they're keeping on adding more. Now, here's the crazy part: many times one of the things that the espionage agencies have is the capability of rewriting base level firmware on the cell phone over the network without having to have prior credentials or prior hacks. It's just essentially it's like the device was manufactured with the vulnerability. Not just a 0 day. It's like it's often essentially someone that's sitting on the cell phone design committee and just says, "Oh, by the way, we left a back door for you." Now, here's the thing that's crazy about that: when you have that capability, you can actually redo parts of the firmware that control the hardware to have it have new capabilities. Now they might be like very limited. They might be really, really, really shoddy, but they do give you some crazy things. The ability to have a powered cell phone that actually exfiltrates data even when the battery is removed, maybe that wasn't designed to do that originally, but maybe essentially you have a little bit more power left over from, oh, I don't know, like the temperature monitor. You just wanted to make sure that the battery stayed warm or didn't like overheat, and that was a separate backup circuit. Well, what do you know? It turns out that essentially, if you do a firmware update, you could actually bleed that over into the cell phone unit, not the CPU, because that doesn't need to see that or whatever. But it just was a nice little design engineering feature, and you turn that thing on, and well, I can now see it on a map at NSA HQ. Those are the sorts of little hidden features that you can have buried in every single communications device manufactured. Whether or not they're used is inconsequential because the one time you use it, it's the time that actually matters. So the real question is whether or not you've pissed someone off, Ken, not whether or not it's possible to do, because it's possible to do some astounding stuff. It's just a
Well,
matter
not
of
at a
whether
hacker
proof is
conference.
there.
I think they don't care if it's Ken. They'll just do it because I
Oh, go
need
to
to
the wall of
prove.
sheep. Yeah.
Look, and I don't know if it was Chris that made the comment, but that the vice president has the best cyber protection. I think that's a fallacy. You might as well just say that the Pentagon will never get hacked. Oh, hang on a minute. The Chinese hacked all their HR records. Yeah, that's right.
The executive track is a little different because they control the nuclear supply, and that's something that it's like if there's like things the state to protect, it's a very tiny number that gets the highest priority. President is right in that circle. There's a couple others that have that same level of classification,
Here's what's
and you
interesting is that people believe that the US has probably the best cybersecurity out there, and it doesn't. The
Not by a
fallacy to
long
think
shot.
exactly the thing that gets me, I'm not Ukrainian, but the thing that gets me is when people make comments like, "Oh, well, the American NSA is going to teach the Ukrainians." Do you realize that the Ukrainians have been fighting a real cyber wars for over 20 years? They have experience that the NSA sends people to learn in Ukraine, so they see while that they're shutting down the power grids, they're playing with the banks, they're doing all of this stuff. It's like it's a great training ground. So
The
Ukraine
hacker
should be coming
playground.
here. Yeah, so here the NSA is playing with simulations. There, they're doing it for real, and you guys know there's a big difference. So, anyways, so I don't think I think if somebody intended on doing something to the vice president, to Ken's point, it's the Secret Service should know better.
Well, I think offensive capabilities are one thing, but defensive, it's hard to know what the holes are because cybersecurity is kind of like protecting a sphere. How can you best protect a sphere? Well, you need another sphere to protect that sphere, and that kind of lets you understand the layers behind security, but that it's still possible to weave in and out. And most of these systems, unfortunately, are the argument that I would make are made to be vulnerable. The people who control the keys are the gatekeepers, so it's all about who has the private keys, or in some instances, who has the cryptographic instruction sets for the processors.
it's
And I
and I
think for
think
some examples, all you have to do is go back to remember when Obama was the first president. He wanted to bring his own BlackBerry,
that's an
and a
excellent
lot of
example.
the is that what you're going to bring? Yeah, and that was a lot of discussion about there's no way to protect him. So they were basically saying we admit there's just no way. There's just too many different ways
But
of getting into this.
Instead,
do you
he had
remember
to
that?
use that bulky trio-looking device.
Well, actually, hold on. So here's the crazy part. Much like when the president drives around in a limo, and then they go, "Wow, that's a really nice limo." That limo is a custom build, basically armored tank. It just happens to look like a like a limo on the outside. Same thing for the plane. It's like, oh, that looks like a 747. Well, that's what it looks like. On the inside, it's got electronic countermeasures, nuke launching, the control codes, and like all manner of all sorts of crazy countermeasure stuff. Anything that they have with the executive level security on that level, it's not what it looks like on the surface. They are running a heavily customized build that kind of looks like what the old thing is on the surface, but underneath there's a lot more going into it. A more useful old framework to think of when you're looking at like who's better at hacking who type thing or who has what skill. There's like the manpower HR version, but another way to think about it is attack surface and defense surface. If you're only protecting a very tiny number of targets and that are extremely high priority, that is a very different scenario from saying, let's protect 10 million government computers. That is a very different scenario from saying, when you're attacking a group, saying, we're going to mass hack essentially the power grid that's going to affect millions of people. And so we need to basically figure out how the hundreds of people that work at the power company and figure out how to worm our way into the system, is very different from saying, we're going to target this specific diplomat, this specific general who's going to have a GPS location when we want to strike an artillery thing on it because they use a cell phone. It's a
But can
very
I
different
say it
I,
scenario.
has happened? It has happened. It just has not been announced. The DoD has had it happen. FEMA has had to respond to it. And this is the thing. There's a fallacy in believing that we can protect ourselves in terms of cybersecurity. The issue is, yes, there's a lot of resources that are thrown at the top to protect the top, but the talent we've not been able to capture, and we are lagging behind. So yes, there are some truths to your point, but they're not impenetrable, and it has happened in the past. I'll echo this again. It has happened in the past.
Okay, real quick, and this is really low tech, but Tyler, did you say she's going to speak to the steel workers?
That was Ken.
Yeah, I said
Okay,
that. Yeah,
Ken.
there's a steelworkers convention in
Okay,
Vegas. Yeah.
Is it the same
so
convention center?
I know. Yeah, well, hold on a second. I know that you guys are talking about the hackers and what's going to happen there. Do you really think the steel workers are going to embrace her? She may have a, a bigger challenge
No.
Well, I think they're having to
delivering a
fight
message.
with Chinese cheap metal imports, and so that's why the government has to prop up the metal manufacturing and refinement. So I
I
think
get
that's
that. I
more.
get that. I'm just talking about pushback. You guys, we're talking about the hackers, but let's just be serious. The steel workers. She's not a great speaker in certain groups. She didn't
She's
speak
there to
very
hand
well.
out money.
You
Who
know
would
what?
turn
You can
that
hand
down?
out. You know what? A lot of people think money is green, but that doesn't mean that you're always welcome. So anyway,
No, Robert, I'm surprised you said that because I would think it's a union, right? It's basically it's union. The unions are generally pro-democrat, and Biden's left in place the Trump tariffs, because of the union. So why would she have an issue with them?
I
I
would
think she's
think
going to do
Biden
great.
would. I think Biden would do better with his Scranton delivery, steelworkers delivery. I don't think that. Just observe how she speaks in her
I
speeches.
understand what you're saying now. Okay, it's not really okay. It's you just think Biden would have done a better job than she did. I would agree with that. But
She is not going to motivate him. Take a look at
No,
her
where's
speech
showing
to the
motivation?
to the Naval Academy. It was dead. I mean, she couldn't motivate her whatsoever. All I'm saying is, I get the hacking that all you guys are talking about. I don't see her moving the steelworkers. I mean, they may pay the hackers to hack her. I don't know. I'm just joking.
By the way, also Robert, if Biden does not run again, and obviously she would run, maybe they're giving her some time to practice and work this stuff out for 2 years. I mean,
Dems are fucked if that's their strategy.
Well, maybe this
Exactly.
is a way to get those secret emails so that you can secure those union supports for the next election.
Okay,
Just
next. I think it says this Wall Street Journal, despite YouTube suspending hundreds of Kremlin linked channels, Russia has yet to ban YouTube in Russia. Some argue because the Kremlin views it as too big to block, meaning that it would embarrass the Kremlin that YouTube's no longer allowed, and it would upset people that YouTube's no longer allowed. And
it's the new banker, like too big to fail, like financial bailout. It's too big to block the internet agency that has power over nation state governments.
hey Cheryl, did you just take away that thing on the
Oh,
that was
you
pinned?
want me to pin again? I can do
Yeah,
that.
pencil. I'll just quickly mention it, and if people want to download it, they can because it's a lengthy document.
Okay, I'll pick it
But
up again.
yeah, it's just something that's very tech related. It's App and Levin, I think, is going to make an investment or merge with Unity or something, and there's a lot of detail in there. So I just asked Cheryl to
Oh yeah, Unity went full ad tech on us with things. It's like, yay, more surveillance.
Chris, let me finish. Okay, so I just asked Cheryl to pin it's the letter from Apple, was it App and Levin? It's like their whole merger proposal, whatever it is, in detail. I just thought it would be good to if people wanted to read that, you could just click on that and download it because it is lengthy. You're not going to be able to read it during our little club today, but I just wanted to put it up there so people can find it. If they want, they can download it, and that was it. Thanks.
okay,
Very briefly, there's a thing. Unity went through layoffs. Is important to note with stuff. They laid off was like 5-10% of their staff. Depends on essentially which district and which area you're looking at. Some divisions got hit harder than others. So when they're looking at that at the same time as multi-billion-dollar buyouts and mergers and such, it's leaving some bad industry taste. And video games is a small industry. It's actually a very let me rephrase that. It's a big industry financially, but it's a very tight, small industry for like the veterans that have been around for a while, and that goodwill is not easy to get back. It's something that when you're looking at developer communities, they live and die based upon whether or not you've got goodwill for the community. So they're spending some of that right now. Doesn't mean they can't get that back, but it is worth contrasting with Epic Games and Fortnite style stuff where they are spending fortunes to get anything they can, essentially goodwill from community. So that will shift how people talk about these companies.
Yeah, Epic Games started doing goodwill for the community about 5 years ago when they open sourced everything and started giving out money for people that would help them and fix it or make stuff for the engine. And I think right now Unity has a very is it one of the Unity executives who said the elements of the gaming community were stupid or something? So
Yeah.
there's also that hot pot of water there.
It doesn't mean that this is a permanent situation. The same way where it's dangerous for have a market have too much concentration. Epic Games right now is getting a little bit scary right now because the problem is that like I think we look. I was one of the biggest proponents of Google back in the day with things. It's like here's the coolest thing. It's a company that's not going to do any evil type kind of parts. That's one of the reasons why I am so harsh about a lot of things with Google and other tech companies. Is not coming from a position of going, oh, I don't like what they're doing, essentially in a public thing. It comes from a position of a very, very burned, passionate person that spent a very number of years pumping up these companies. So what's interesting is when you see things like the goodwill efforts being happening with Epic Games, etc., watch very closely how they navigate the antitrust and the discussions about the App Store and such for competitiveness, because when you have market dominance, it gives you the ability to consolidate your position over time, and you're not necessarily under the same obligations to keep that goodwill. So watch very carefully how this market develops because it's going to change very quickly as
Well,
it consolidates.
I think so far Tim Sweeney has been pretty awesome.
Oh,
I've
so
in
far it's been
fact
awesome.
engaged with him on a few occasions where I've had issues either with the marketplace or something. There was one kind of underboob character model that was available front page, and I was like, hold on a second, this should be kind of more kid friendly, and he responded and it was fixed within the hour. That's some Elon Musk type executive engagement with the community, I think. And so insofar as that is an example of the kind of goodwill that I hope continues, I think Epic Games might be not so evil, at least yet.
They are on the ball right now and doing a great job, and I think they deserve a lot of support. The thing is, I'm just cautioning is saying they need to have competitors, and that competitor ecosystem needs to be maintained. So when Unity essentially loses goodwill and says, look, we can make financially money by mistreating our customers or mistreating our developers or mistreating our employees, and that becomes more standard or essentially becomes a thing, what that means is that the competitive environment becomes something that ends up putting pressure on Epic to not embrace that sort of environment. So you want to have healthy ecosystems. It's not just about whether or not one company is being healthy, it's whether or not you have the ecosystem with that.
Yeah,
And
but
video games have
Unity's approach is, hey, if you're not thinking about microtransactions from the onset of game design, then you're stupid, right? That was kind of almost word for word what they were saying. So I hope they at least take that back, because I don't think every developer wants to think about microtransactions or have that be part of the game. There's other ways of funding that kind of development.
and video games. One last thing to throw out there for people that are essentially like, why video games? Why is it a thing? And Ken actually I'm really grateful for him putting this on here as a discussion topic. Video game engines are the foundation that we build so many other technologies on. Most of the things that are happening from artificial intelligence that came from cheap GPUs that were designed for rendering polygons on the screen to have video game characters, shoot each other or play in virtual worlds. Those video game technologies are the same things being used for big data collection and being able to synthesize the sets together for GPU acceleration. There's other things that have happened with the video game engines, being able to work with digital twins, being able to have manufacturing boosts. A lot of very advanced technologies have their origins with this. So the other reason when
Yeah,
China
it's
says we're
a
going to
game
ban,
engine to engine of the economy.
yeah, there is a translation link there, and if you actually look at VentureBeat, they actually have a whole section of their publication actually dedicated to video game engines and tracing where the investments happen in the space and how which developments that get created in there, how they end up actually impacting larger economy over time. There's actually some fascinating write-ups on this. But it's something to pay very close attention to, because it's like video games import other places where they're willing to take risks that other industries just aren't. And when you can prove something work in those industries, they can typically be rebranded and reworked for other places. So it's one of those, like, if there's an R&D industry for the R&D industry, video games would be it. So there's some crazy stuff happening that's actually these days. So it's really cool to see how Unity's navigating the environment.
Okay. I just ate an apple too fast, and I have uncontrollable hiccups. So we're going to have to wrap it, but I'll try and get out one last one that I wanted to share. Rainwater is no longer safe to drink anywhere on Earth, according to scientists.
It's pretty bad.
Rainwater almost
Yay!
everywhere on Earth.
Yay!
Unsafe levels
Even in Antarctica.
Unsafe levels of
Yep.
other chemicals. Per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, known as PFAS, are a large family of
So
human-made chemicals
plastic.
that don't occur in nature. They are known as forever chemicals because they don't break down in the environment. They have non-stick or stain repellent properties. Now, researchers at the University of Stockholm have found them in rainwater in most locations on the planet, including Antarctica. There's no safe place because the parts per million that is considered safe is exceeded everywhere in the world in rainwater now.
Very briefly, I looked into this very recently. With things, it's been a day or two on it. Very briefly, it's about 100 nanograms per liter was the old specification for how much fluorine was detectable in people's blood. It's noticeable because, as far as we know, people didn't have fluorine in their blood like ever up until essentially like 1950s, 1960s when they started to mine in large quantities for the nuclear program. Uranium hexafluoride, that fluoride at the end that's used to essentially for the gas centrifuges. And afterwards, they're saying, "What can we do with this?" Well, let's put it in Teflon nonstick pans. You can make omelets. It's great. Maybe putting that as cookware that we use it for high temperatures, just so we don't have to, scrape something down. Maybe that wasn't the best idea. But you're about to see the same sort of response happen from the tobacco and the oil industries, where they hire large PR groups to say, "Is it really that damaging?" One of the things that we're finding is that is that from biological studies over the last 2 or 3 years, it turns out that there, much like lead poisoning, there is no lower limit. Any exposure to fluorine has fertility effects, things essentially happening with cancer
It's just a
generation, all
matter of
sorts of great
time. Like,
estrogen.
what's the timeline on event occurring? What's the likelihood, given your genetic makeup and this
Right.
interaction right here? Do you have a 5-year clock or 20-year clock on some cancer or exotic disease, or onset that much sooner? So it's a great point. The idea of toxicology, how we look at toxicology, has changed from, hey, it's just proportional to mass, to, oh shit, it's actually more like binary in some instances. That's how dangerous the chemicals that humans synthesize are.
Right, and when they talk about
Yes,
forever chemicals, that's a very important part because the original idea is that about breaking down in the environment. Because the original idea is that most chemicals do break down. The thing is, fluorine. One of the things that makes it so amazing is it is almost indestructible. It has one of the highest energy bonds known to man. They actually use it for when they're creating solar panels or semiconductors. What they'll do is they'll actually use it as a buffer gas when they're actually creating the monocrystalline or the polysilicon in these giant Siemens. Basically, just they fill a bunch of they just fill a gas chamber with this stuff, shoot electricity through into the sand particles that essentially just adhere and make these giant crystals. It's actually really cool stuff. That's how they make the wafers. But what's interesting about that fluorine, though, is that whenever it actually gets out, well, you've got some problems. Now, with the rainwater thing specifically, there's like 3 studies that happen all at once, and the one that you just named, Tyler, is one of the most significant ones. But the 2 that led into this was, one, they realized that the biological active amount was actually much lower than they thought it was. They've had known that it's dangerous from where plant workers that work with fluorine heavy compounds, people, also places where like they do like ski waxing of all things. Turns out that that ski wax thing to make it slick and not stick to the ice. Turns out when they're actually melting the wax onto the skis, they're actually inhaling massive quantities of this fluorine toxin, and it turns out that actually can be deadly and has all sorts of problems. So now they're going back and saying, can we actually do something about this if it's accumulating in the environment? The other last thing, and I'll wrap this part, is that there's environmental toxins for that's actually been there. The other thing that we found is not just the biologically active parts; it's our ability to detect it. Newer sensor technologies, our ability to essentially measure this stuff, has gone way lower than it used to be in the past. When you saw Fukushima and they said, "Oh no, essentially we've been detected radiation in the environment." Don't get me wrong, radiation can cause a lot of damage. The thing that was impressive, though, is that we were able to detect it all the way in California in very, very tiny quantities. Now, the thing that's the question is, can those kind of quantities cause damage? And the thing they're finding out now is yes, and that's only for the last few years that we know of. The legal liability comes back from, well, did DuPont know about this decades ago, like the cigarette people did, like the oil industry people did, et cetera, and there'll be lawyers going back and forth on that for the next few decades. But the last part is that they found out, they thought that would essentially just go into the ocean, even if it doesn't break down,
Where?
it'll dilute in the ocean, we're going to be fine. Well, as it turns out, it actually floats to
My
the
room, no
surface of the
problem.
ocean, and sea spray gets wind just pushes it back up onto shore, and then it comes back down as rainwater. So that concentration is constantly increasing over time as we manufacture more of the chemical, which means over time it bioaccumulates, which means that we have a potential issue not just for human healthcare stuff, but also for all mammals on Earth. So one more thing we need to fix on the list of things after we fix climate change. So this is one of those things that we might have to do a giant cleanup project for riverways and stuff. I've actually done some cool brainstorming on that for other things, but that's a separate topic. Anyways, it's fascinating stuff.
But the adversarial nature of science means that you can't fault, for example, big tobacco trying to disprove gravity, because that's all you're ever trying to do in science. You're never trying to prove your case. You're trying to disprove that body of evidence in favor of this body of evidence, which supports a better hypothesis of some sort, right? So even in the best case scenario, you would want, for example, tobacco to start spending more money on research. It's kind of like the conversation earlier about anti-Semitism. You want that stuff out in the open. Eventually they run out of ammunition or arguments. So I think it's just a matter of enumerating the solutions and then going through in a methodical way.
I'm copy and pasting the channel Source Watch White Coats project for how the tobacco industry essentially bought out and bribed science stuff, and it's a counterpoint to that. But I want to get too far off track. I'll just put it in the chat room.
Oh yeah, I was just making a joke from the movie Thank You for Smoking, where the scientists were so good for big tobacco that they could disprove gravity. That's why it took 20
Yes,
years
that's
to
what you
win the
tell.
court case, or however long it ended
I
up
don't know what
taking.
to do out there. So I just pinned to the top of the room a related article about backyard hen eggs in parts of Australia. Notably, it's a really interesting article if you scroll through it. They show a whole lot of data of where it's safe to have chickens and not. Because in the more closer you get to central Sydney, the higher the lead levels, very unsafe lead levels, in the chicken eggs that you'll have because of the lead in the soil. So you could be poisoning yourself by growing your own chicken eggs too close to central Sydney. And
Imagine what
then,
we're doing to all the other things in the biosphere.
right. Well, by the way, this whole process is just getting warmed up, just similar to the unsafe rain, the forever plastics in the rain everywhere. The
It's Raining Plastic sounds like a Prince song.
So,
yeah.
Chris, I'm just curious. So, how about the water from the Fukushima nuclear power plant right now compared with this all this rainwater?
You can detect the similar, very, 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 very tiny concentrations. The unknown part is what the radiations affect damaging. Linear no threshold model was assumed to be the long case, standing case, like lead. That was the original assumption, is that any exposure is bad. As it turns out, radiation might actually be a little bit different as the hormeosis hypothesis, and that one seems to be a little bit actually more accurate in that your body can actually tolerate a very tiny amount of radiation and then it goes bad, but as long as it's below that, it actually has slightly regenerative things. It's very counterintuitive and controversial, but it whether or not essentially that the radioactive distributed throughout the ocean pivots on that being essentially true or not. So there's a lot of interesting things in that direction.
Yeah, most of it kind of is stable, although some parts are unstable, and radiation acts kind of like a machine gun shooting at a wall of code. Some bits get thrown out, they can get recovered through error correcting mechanisms, but there are some, and that's why I guess it's nonlinear, that depending on where you got shot or how the radiation hits you, you might have lost the radiation lottery at that moment.
Right, and the thing that's interesting is that what's weird is that we are naturally exposed to radiation all the time just by being on the environment. We take a plane ride, when you sit in a brick building, when you walk outside, etc. When you eat a banana. Now the quantities of those are very, 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 very tiny. The thing is that normally there's a certain amount of error correction code. It's not a linear on or off kind of thing. Your body has a gradient of how much it can actually apply that at any one time, kind of like an immune system response, whether or not around a vigorous response, it's going to like kill that thing with fire, or whether it's going to be, we'll get around to it. And that's actually, this also applies to the error correction. And there's some weird relationship with stress stuff, but with radiation, seems to be actually a very narrow range. And I must emphasize, this is a very tiny amount. That where you have, if you're exposed to very, very tiny amounts of radiation, your body actually kicks in error correction at a slightly higher than normal back level, to the point where it actually might actually extend lifespan. We're not talking long, we're talking like 6-12 months type kind of thing. But you go quickly above that amount, and then it ends up becoming essentially the classic, oh, there's the glowing green person and now they die of cancer kind of thing. but there's a very, very narrow, tiny initial window there where it actually might have slightly beneficial symptoms, and we don't understand that very well. But that's when they say, oh, can you detect Fukushima over in California in the ocean? It's a bit of a controversial thing of, is that actually damaging or not? We don't know. And that's where some of the things are. The other thing is, the last part to put out is that the part of we don't know is, as we're finding out with tobacco, oil, things that are happening, essentially climate change, etc., you can pay for some really shoddy science, and then it takes exhaustive finding out who paid for what. So sourcing that for why we don't know, maybe we do know, and then it's been needlessly made controversial so that essentially that dodges liability. All that's in play. It's a fun world we live in.
Okay, I got to wrap it there. Thank you, everybody, and we will do it again